Welcome to DCA's Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee meeting. It's being held via teleconference, Ring Central, on Wednesday, May 27, 2020. So could we please have a roll call?
Sure. Chair Palmer.
Here.
Vice Chair Keegan. I know I saw her, but maybe she's
probably muted.
okay. She's here. Committee Member Whaley.
Present.
Committee Member Swenson.
Here.
Committee Member Berrigan Perea. Committee Member Giacomo.
I thought I saw her.
Yeah. Okay. Committee Member Flosky.
I'm here.
Oh, great, thanks guys. Committee Member Shia.
Here.
Committee Member Cosio.
Here.
Committee Member Gonzalez Potter.
Go home. Everything locked up? All right.
No, for Gonzalez
What
Potter.
good with?
Committee Member Wallace.
Here.
Committee Member Cox.
Here.
Committee Member Tarango. Committee Member Mann. Committee Member Liebig.
Man is here.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Liebig. Committee Member Teabo.
Here.
Committee Member Lytle.
Here.
Committee Member Moran.
Here.
Committee Member Robertson.
Here.
Committee Member Merlot.
Here.
Committee Member Worth.
Here.
Committee Member Hardesty.
Here.
I just want to, the few people that I didn't hear say, is Isabella, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Jesus, are you on the line?
Yes, ma'am. Jesus Tarango's online.
Thanks, Jesus. Lindsay Liebig.
Lindsay's here. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can. Thank you. And then it looks like Mike Hardesty. All right. Well, we have a quorum with only two absent as of now.
Very good, very good. Okay, then let us continue on with the housekeeping. And I want to say that again, good afternoon. This is Sarah Palmer, Chair, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate the fact that you're taking time to participate in this process and providing your thoughts on ways that we could provide a community focus for the engineering aspects of the conveyance project. Being that we have unprecedented times, I hope everybody's doing really well, keeping yourselves separate. Don't forget your masks when you go out. I'd like to make clear for the record that this meeting is being conducted by Ring Central and teleconference pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N29-20 in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. The purpose of the SEC is to create a forum for Delta stakeholders to provide input and feedback on the technical and engineering issues related to the DCA's current activities. The SEC is a formal advisory body to the DCA Board of Directors. As such, and like the DCA itself, it is subject to the public transparency laws applicable to local public agencies like the Brown Act and the Public Record Act. Okay, so basically, public comment today, how it's going to be working when we do public comment. We're going to try to keep our remote meetings consistent with our in-person meetings. So with presentations and SEC discussion following. As noted on the agenda, public comment will be handled a little bit differently this afternoon to address this platform. Public participants in the meeting will be muted except during the public comment period. This period will occur after the conclusion of the staff presentation and the SEC questions and comments for all agenda items. Of course, SEC folks are going to be commenting and asking questions during the agenda. If you wish to provide remote telephonic public comment on agenda items, please make sure you email Claudia Rodriguez by 3:15 p.m. Once we get to that point, Ms. Rodriguez will call out each person to speak by agenda item. She will unmute their line and allow you 3 minutes to provide comments. We are also accepting written comments, and all written comments should be emailed to Ms. Rodriguez before the conclusion of the meeting. They will be included in the record of this meeting, but will not be read during the meeting, but it will be included in the record. We will follow the same process for public comment on non-agendized items. Also, about that 3 minute, what we're going to do is we will put a timer on the screen. I'll give you a little bit of a warning, like a 1 minute warning before your time is up, because I don't want to stop you right in mid-sentence or anything, just that we're going to try to move this along. Okay, so we appreciate your patience, and we'll be examining ways to provide additional public input during future teleconference meetings. So, regarding the SEC comments and questions, in order to provide an organized opportunity for SEC members to provide comment without everyone talking over one another, we've asked the SEC members to raise their hand within the Ring Central program, and our moderator, Valerie Martinez, will call the name of each SEC member to make a comment or ask a question. Now, Valerie, you wanted to say a couple of things, so why don't you take it from here?
Sure, just a couple of housekeeping items. One, just a reminder to keep, it's recommended that you keep your mic muted when you're talking, so that you don't get that transference. So again, or hear what's going on in the background. So please do keep your mic muted. The other thing I'd note is that there was a lot of materials that we were providing you over the last few days in preparation for this meeting. On Friday, you received a packet of information with the agenda and the April meeting minutes. I'll also note that today you received a large packet as well. One was what's called the May map book. So it's an updated map book from the map books you've had in the past. The SEC presentation, which is a base presentation, along with something called the DCA traffic. It's a zip file. It's another portion of the presentation. Essentially, the presentation packets were just monstrous. So there's that. And to that end, this is a really, really intense meeting in terms of the amount of information that's going to be coming through. So we're really going to try to manage when questions come through and how we discuss, what the cadence is of the meeting, because literally one of the presentations is probably going to take about 2 hours because of the level of detail and the amount of information we're going to be moving you through. And again, as usual, we don't expect you to immediately come back with comments or responses or reactions. This is a download. This is why we're giving you the information so you can go through it along with the download and then come back afterward with those questions and comments. We also provided you with the SEC number 8 tracking packet. That's our standard Q&A packet that provides all of the information, all of the questions and the answers to those questions. And Catherine, did you want to kind of talk about a little bit why that's such an important, a critical part of the work that we're doing?
Well, yeah, to that point, we've received some PRAs from members of the public on the SEC comment forms. So that a handful of you submitted a couple weeks ago, 2 to 6 weeks ago. They came in batches. Apparently some people preferred a PRA than just email. But I just want to apologize for any time that it took for you to review your correspondence for those PRAs. I appreciate the time that you took. Hopefully that's just a minor price to pay for your service to the Delta in this committee. But I just want you to know that all of the comments that were in your forms are in the Q&A that you received, and it's what we do with everything. So for example, sometimes we get comments in an email. They all go into this Q&A form. So if you ever want to know what any of your other committee members have said, or if the public wants to know, they just have to look at the Q&A sheets and they can find it. We had promised to put the response to those forms in last month's meeting, but we got sidetracked with the whole online meeting coordination. So apologize for the delay, but they are in there. And every time, like I said, just for reference, all comments that we receive, no matter what format they come in, they get entered into this database. They get separated into individual comments so that we can track them individually, because a lot of times different people need to respond to them. But that's the way that we manage all of your comments and make sure that we've recorded them and responded. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And we'll be mailing out a response to the PRAs with the actual copies of the forms, I think in the next week or so. So.
Okay.
There you go.
Anything else, Valerie?
Nope, that about does it. Just I can't emphasize enough that we're going to be writing high and tight today for this meeting to make sure that you get all the information, because it's a lot of really good critical traffic information and map discussion. So we want to make sure that we get to all of that. So with that, Sarah?
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say as well that about 5 o'clock, I'm going to have to be leaving this meeting because I have a strategic planning meeting I'm supposed to, they kind of overlapped. So Ms. Keegan is going to be taking over around 5 o'clock for that. So then let's get into the minutes review. Does anyone have any changes, comments, or questions about the minutes from the last time? And note also that we have until Friday to make adjustments by sending your comments to Jasmine Runquist. Is there anything?
I'm just going to make a note that on the very last page, there was an email and we forgot to put the context for the email. It was from Anna Swenson. So you just see the body of the email, but you don't see who it's from. So thank you for David for pointing that out. We'll make the change.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so Anna Swenson's email. Okay, so then we're going to get into our staff presentation and committee discussion. And so I'll call on staff to make the presentation in item 4 on the agenda. So Carrie, can you please provide an update on the CEQA process?
And again, I'm just going to note that Carrie's going to roll through her presentation. It's pretty tight, and then we'll do questions afterward. So Carrie, thank you.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to provide just an update on where we are on the environmental review. There have been some questions and thoughts about this, so I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. So starting with this slide, which you guys have seen before, this is an overview of the environmental review that we're going through. And so we released the notice of preparation in January, followed by scoping meetings, and now we are in the period where we are developing the scoping summary report. And I just wanted to remind folks about some of the things that are still coming up. We will be formulating alternatives and analyzing them, doing an impact assessment and developing that information into an admin draft, and then a draft EIR, which will be early 2021. And then we will circulate that for public comments, have public hearings, respond to comments, and go for a final EIR in early 2022. So just a few things about how the scoping process went. We had a 93-day public comment period from January 15th through April 17th. There were 8 public meetings throughout the state with a total of 735 combined attendees, with over 850 comment letters and 3,500 individual comments. So what we're doing now, as I mentioned, we got a lot of comments. So the main thing we're doing is reviewing those comments. So it's a lot of material to look through. So we are reviewing the feedback that we received from the agencies and members of the public during scoping, so we can consider how to incorporate that into the development of the draft EIR. And specifically, we're looking at incorporating feedback on the range of alternatives that will be evaluated in detail and the scope of the environmental impact analysis. We're also preparing a scoping report that captures all of the scoping related information, including comments received and scoping meeting transcripts. And we're starting to prepare the draft EIR. A lot of the work we're doing now is researching the environmental setting and regulatory setting, and we're also working on establishing the methodology to start the impact analysis. And for tribal consultation, that's continuing at the tribe's discretion. When we started the project, we sent out letters to 121 tribes throughout the study area to initiate consultation under AB 52 and DWR's tribal engagement policy. We've reached out to all of the tribes that responded to those letters, but due to the COVID-19 public health situation, some tribes have wanted to delay that discussion, and we understand that completely. So we've met virtually with the interested tribes and communicated with the remaining tribes that we're available to meet whenever they're ready. So we'll continue to work with these tribes tribes deliveries.
Carrie, can you repeat that? I think you blacked out for a few of us.
Uh-oh, where did I black out?
Just for the tribes that want to, that last sentence.
Okay, I think I'm going to turn off my video. I think my internet's a little funky and you guys might hear me better.
Okay.
So we'll try that. So I was just saying that we're going to be working with tribes whenever they're ready, and we'll be working with them to identify potential effects to tribal cultural resources and consider potential mitigation measures.
Thank you.
Okay, so upcoming milestones. For the CEQA side, we're going to be publishing the scoping report this summer. We are also going to be selecting alternatives this summer and working towards publication of the draft EIR in early 2021. And during the last meeting, there were a number of questions about the schedule related to the DCA, and I think we kind of didn't get there. I sent out an email after the meeting, and I think all of you received it, but just as an update, the draft engineering project reports are due from the DCA in July of 2020, and the final is September 2020. And since we have not yet selected alternatives, that July date for any alternatives may be a little bit delayed, but the September 2020 date we are still aiming for final reports. So that leads us to alternatives. So the draft EIR will look at a reasonable range of potentially feasible alternatives that can achieve the project objectives and avoid or reduce significant environmental impacts, consistent with the requirements of CEQA. So we are working now to formulate alternatives by screening the alternatives that we've received through scoping and any other technical ideas we have and information from past projects. And so we're pulling all of that together into a screening process to identify that range of alternatives. And when we identify alternatives to the proposed project, we are going to need the DCA to design those alternatives, and we need the SEC to, well, the DCA needs the SEC to provide input on that design. So we need to give you guys an update on how we're moving through that process. So I'd like to come back in June or July to present the results of that screening process for information so that as you guys move forward, you understand why the DCA is asking for feedback on different alternatives. And this is my standard slide. I think you guys are pretty up to date on how to reach us, but just in case, here's the information, and your SEC representatives are probably the best way to stay informed with everything that's going on. So with that, Val, I'll try to turn my video back on and we can see if there are any questions.
All right, are there any questions? Again, please raise your hand if you have questions. Sean Worth has some questions. Go ahead, Sean.
Where does NEPA fit in?
So NEPA, we're still working on. Actually, that was a note that I meant to bring up and forgot to bring up because it was off slide. So I think a number of people know that last week we were at the Central Valley Flood Protection Board asking for a letter to initiate the Section 408 process with the Corps. So backing up a little, right now the project does not have a federal partner. It doesn't have a federal project proponent. So one of the regulatory agencies will need to be the NEPA lead. And they will need to decide who is the most appropriate NEPA lead as the federal agency group. So we are initiating processes with the federal agencies so that they can decide that. So last week was one of those things. We went to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and asked to initiate the Section 408 process with the Corps. We're also trying to initiate work with them on the 404 side so that all of the groups of the Corps are involved, and they will be working to identify a NEPA lead. So the 408 letter I wanted to touch on because I think there may have been some confusion about what that letter indicated. It wasn't in any way approval from the flood board or agreement that this project should move forward. It didn't imply any approval or agreement. It was just a letter to initiate coordination with the Corps.
All right. David Glosky. And Sean, by the way, your hand's still up. I don't know if you have another question. Okay, David Glosky.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if you can shed any light on, is the DCA staff involved with the alternatives? Like, I imagine you look at alternatives and if you pick a couple, you ask them to look at the design for them. But even as you're evaluating alternatives, do the DCA people get involved in the evaluation of those?
So they're only involved to the extent that they have suggested a couple as technical experts, but that all comes to DWR to make a decision. And we're looking at it from the CEQA, from a CEQA perspective.
And everything's assigned. I think that was a point that you made during your presentation, correct?
What do you mean, everything's aside?
Assigned. It's assigned to the DCA. So
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, we will make a decision and ask the DCA to proceed in designing those alternatives.
Great. Anna Swenson.
Is there a list of these alternatives, and are any of the alternatives that are being considered different from the other iterations of this project?
There are a few ideas that are a little different. I don't have a full list in front of me because at the moment we're still working through some of the public comments, but we will have a list when we talk about it with the SEC. The ones that I've seen or talked about so far are predominantly things that we have heard as ideas before, sometimes permutations of ideas that we've heard before. So it's not, I don't think that there's anything suggested so far that will be so far out of left field that you guys will be confused, but I think that there are a few different ways of looking at things.
Okay, great. I think, so, you know, we've gone through the process before. If we have further questions, please do either email them in or, you know, we'll continue moving this forward or save it towards the end of the meeting. So with that, I think, again, this next section is going to be a heavy lift. So Sarah, if you want to introduce Catherine.
Well, then I think, Catherine, you're going to be introducing Dan Hubbard and Kim Paxson. So please play.
Yeah, okay, so Don, you want to pull your presentation up now? Let him share the screen. So Don Hubbard is a traffic planner. That's his area of expertise. And this is a topic that's probably nearest and dearest to a lot of you on the committee. So we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of time for you all. And we've done a fairly detailed presentation with a significant appendix. And we're looking forward to the dialogue here. What Don has done is built a model of the traffic in the Delta, and the primary purpose of this is to help us figure out what engineering logistics solutions that we need to put into our design to then deliver to DWR as part of the alternatives analysis. This is not a CEQA study. Carrie will be doing her own study on the traffic impacts, and it may result in changes to this. So I just want people to realize this. The methodology that we used is not the CEQA methodology, but it does deal with the level of service to people in the Delta. So for our work at this point, it's a really valuable tool. It's a long presentation. We might take a break in the middle of it. We'll take your lead. And if you have lots of questions, we may need to hold off for a little bit to make sure that he gets through it. And I'll let Valerie gauge whether we keep going or keep answering questions. Don's going to be totally flexible. So with that, Don, you want to get started?
Sure thing. So this afternoon, I'm going to start with an introduction to explain what it is we're doing and why it is we're doing it. Then I'm going to discuss the thresholds that we have for remedial action. And because this is a planning study, thresholds are more like targets. Then I'll go through the methodology on how it is we forecast the traffic and analyze its effects. And then we'll go through the results for all of the major roads in the region, for the northern facilities, then the middle facilities, and then the southern facilities. And then attached to this a slideshow, if you find it online, you're going to find there's lots of other material that we won't be going through because there's just a great deal of it. So with that, our goal for this analysis was to identify measures to minimize the effect of the project traffic on project traffic, both trucks and worker trips on the Delta communities. So we're looking for the solution that would allow us to build the project, but would be the least impactful on Delta communities. We did this by developing a traffic model that allows us to quickly evaluate the effectiveness of a wide range of alternatives and to show the differences in traffic effects of doing things one way or another so that we can measure whether or not these certain measures are worthwhile. And we're doing this with a consistent set of criteria. We note that this is not a CEQA analysis, but it's helping us to identify a recommended logistics measures. In other words, we're not we're not analyzing the impacts of the project. We're trying to identify what the project is. For example, whether or not park and ride lots would be part of the project and therefore need to be in the environmental footprint. Ultimately, the CEQA process is going to be the final arbiter of the recommended logistics improvements. Because this is not a CEQA analysis, we have a bit more flexibility than CEQA in what it is we're going to do. So for example, as Catherine said, we used traffic level of service as part of the analysis. Traffic level of service has been used for decades in traffic engineering to measure localized effects on traffic conditions. It's no longer used under CEQA. The state moved away from that, and now traffic impacts under CEQA are measured in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and what's the overall carbon footprint of the state. So CEQA has moved away from level of service, but because this is a planning study pre-CEQA, we can use it. So when I look at this project compared to other projects that I do in other parts of the state, the big challenge here, of course, is you have a sparse road network, and few of the roads in the region are designed for heavy vehicles or heavy traffic volumes. Plus, scattered throughout the region are movable bridges that have limited capacity, and at times the traffic doesn't flow at all because the bridge is closed. There are opportunities with this project that we don't often have on other ones. For example, barge, rail, and conveyor belts are possible in at least some of the locations. And the project duration is long enough to make these investments worthwhile. So on a construction project that might be 3 months or 5 months, you wouldn't consider building a barge landing or rail siding. But for a project of this scope, it is something that we should consider. Plus, the sites can be designed with enough storage space to allow for stockpiling, which means materials can be moved in off-peak conditions. So there are both a combination of challenges and some opportunities here. So let's talk about the thresholds for remedial action. Since this is a planning study, not an EIR, the purpose of the thresholds is to serve as targets while we make iterative adjustments to the plan. So we run the model under one scenario, we see how the traffic conditions were. If they're not good, then we tweak it, and then we run it again and we say, well, what if we add this or add this other element? Did we go too far? Can we get rid of this thing? So that's how this was run. Our term of remedial actions refers to transportation infrastructure developed as part of the project to support a reasonable level of service during the construction period. Remedial action in most of the cases you're going to see is some sort of physical infrastructure. In some cases, they are operational changes. You might want to move certain activities from the daytime to the nighttime, for example, to reduce their traffic impacts. DWR is later going to decide on the methodology and the significance thresholds for the EIR phase, and that are likely to be different from what we're using. Note that as a state agency, they're not subject to local regulations. And what I mean by that is there will be level of service or other thresholds for each jurisdiction in the area. There's lots of jurisdictions. But for this project, DWR as the lead agency will be deciding on the thresholds and the methodology. So the way traffic is usually evaluated is using level of service, which is measured on a scale from A to F, very much like the way grades are given out in school. Level of service A, B, or C allows traffic to move at the posted speed limit with, as you move from A to C, has somewhat more traffic density. But in any case, you can go at the speed, at the posted speed. When you get to level of service D, then you're interacting more with other traffic and you have to slow down as a result of the fact there's other cars on the road. Level of service D is very common on urban and suburban roads. Level of service E, as you move up towards that, it gets close to the capacity of the road and it becomes unstable. There may be times when you're moving quickly. There may be times when you're near, have to slow down or near stop. Your ability to maneuver, to change lanes, etc., is more restricted because of the presence of other cars. And then when you get to level of service F, that's stop and go traffic. The volumes are high in comparison or over the capacity of the road, so there's likely to be queuing. it becomes difficult to predict what your travel time would be and its stop and go conditions. So until CEQA changed, all of the jurisdictions in California had some sort of level of service policy. They still had only for general plan purposes, not for CEQA. In this case, for San Joaquin County, their level of service policy is, their target is D for or better for roads in the congestion management plan. And the map that you see on the right here shows all of the roads in the congestion management plan. Those are the major roads in the county. Usually they're serving more than one community and they serve through routes. So a particular interest for this project is State Route 12, State Route 4, Byron Highway, Mountain House Parkway. These are all have a level of service D as the target, according to the county's policy. All of the other roads in the county that are not shown on this map, all of the smaller roads, for example, have a level of service C policy. For all the other roads not shown on this map's level of service C. Sacramento County is very similar. It has a level of service D target for rural collectors such as Twin Cities Road. So level of service D is the target that's not being achieved, even under existing conditions. So as you can see on the left, this is where it's talking about freeways in 2018, and I-5 is level of service F, even though the target is level of service D. At certain periods of the day, it's level of service F. In the center, you can see the two-lane highways. State Route 12 and portions of State Route 4 are level of service E during the PM peak hour. And over on the right, you can see the collector roads like Byron Highway is level of service F for large periods of the day. So although the level of service is, the target is D, that is not actually being achieved under existing conditions. It's being achieved in most places, but the ones that are of interest to us, there are existing problems. So for our study, we set the threshold for remedial action. So what would trigger a remedial action is if the construction traffic creates a level of service worse than the target level of service, and the project's traffic is 10% or more of the total traffic volume. So we can be adding 10% or more, but if the level of service is good, that would not trigger any remedial action. Or the level of service could be bad, but if we're only adding 1 or 2%, then that again would not trigger remedial action because the problem would not be attributable to this project, but to other things. Our target level of service is level of service C for local roads and D for the major commute routes such as SR 4, 12, and Byron Highway, and D for any new roads that we're building for the project. So this is similar to the level of service goals in both San Joaquin and Sacramento counties, but with consideration of the project's traffic in relation to the existing traffic. Okay, we also have design criteria in addition to the question of how many lanes there are and capacity measured that way. We also have safety considerations and design criteria for routes that are being used by a lot of trucks. The standard is 12-foot lanes and with 4-foot shoulders. We are recommending 6-foot shoulders in places where there are bike lanes. And that's Hood Franklin Road, for example, is a designated bike route. You'd want 6-foot shoulders in that so that trucks can pass the bikes safely. Oh, with that, let me talk about the methodology that we used. As Catherine said, we built a model of the Delta road system and we collected the best available data on existing traffic levels, including time of day variations, and we forecast the traffic to future periods because construction is going to take place over a long period of time. So that constituted the no project or background traffic. Then we imported over that the traffic from our project, which is construction traffic from trucks and workers going to and from the sites. And we added that to the background traffic. When we did that, we had to assign this traffic on different routes based on where the materials was coming from, what routes we would require them to use, and et cetera. So for example, we might require the workers use a certain park and ride lot, and then we would designate the route that the shuttle buses would be taking from the park and ride lot to the site. We would then import the logistics improvements after we've done this, and we check to see whether or not there is any problem in terms of level of service. Then we would talk about improvements. We would add one thing or another until we find something that would create a reasonable level of service. And we analyze the results to identify the least impactful solution that meets the goals. In terms of, okay, so in terms of forecasting the traffic for the background traffic, as you can see, we use the CEQA model to forecast future traffic, which includes new developments that are going on in future years. For the Sacramento Area Council of Governments model was in the north. The San Joaquin Council of Governments model was used in the south. We had counts that were taken for different years. We had to bring them up to existing conditions. Plus, some of the work would take place 10 or 15 years into the future. So we needed to factor that into we had to factor the traffic up or down to the forecast years. So here's an example of forecasting the future background growth. As you can see, we've got a color code here where green is A, B, or C. Level of service D is in yellow, and E is in amber, with red is in F. And under existing conditions, you can see on State Route 12, it's level of service E, but in the future, even without the project, it would go to level of service F. So when we talk about the project traffic, what we've done is we've taken the schedule for different activities on each of the sites, and we figured out what material needs to arrive at the site and what material needs to be removed from the site. And we produce these histograms for different materials, because from a traffic standpoint, these may come on different types of vehicles. And some of them might be able to shift to a different modes, for example, rail, and some of them might not, depending on where it is they're coming from. So we do these, this is all coming from our engineering group. And then in terms of distributing the traffic loads, what you can see here is, for example, the Bacon Island site. There are different paths that could be taken to reach that site. Something could come along State Route 4 from the west, or State Route 4 from the east, or it could come up from the south along Tracy Boulevard. In terms of our presentation, as I said before, we are going to have a color code where green represents A, B, or C. Yellow is a level of service D, amber is level of service E, and red is level of service F. In each case, we are going to be showing you for each individual section 3 maps. The first map is going to be the future no project conditions. So depending on where in the delta we're talking about, we are forecasting the peak year of project activity, which may be 2033, it might be 2035, depends on the location. Then we're going to show if we had all of the material arrive by truck and all of the workers drive to the location, what that would be in terms of traffic impacts. So the reason we do this is because, except for traffic, that would have the smallest footprint, because we're not adding any new facilities that would impact the land in any place. So if that works, we might want to stay with that. Otherwise, we go to the third figure, which shows what happens after we add the proposed remedial actions. So those might be park and ride lots, we might be improving existing roads, put in separate roads just for project traffic, rail spurs, that sort of thing. I will note that that for the without remedial actions, the one thing where the one decision that has been made is that we will have a haul road to service the intake locations. The reason is we don't want any truck traffic on SR 160. We feel that that road is unsafe for large volumes of heavy trucks, and so even in the no remedial action, there will be that one action of creating the haul routes, which I'll discuss in a little while. So we've got two components. I've already showed you the histogram on what we did for the truck loading. We also have worker trips, and so we have to identify where those workers would be coming from and what route they would take. So we looked at the labor pool available for the project. These are what the Census Bureau says are the residential locations for construction, mining, and utilities workers residing within a reasonable commute shed of the project. And we did this based on county subdivisions, which disaggregates the counties into, you know, 5 or 6 different areas. And we did that in order to get realistic routing and so that we can get a better estimate of the distance that they will be traveling for the purposes of a VMT calculation. We then used what traffic engineers call a gravity model to determine how far people would travel and which sites they would go to. So gravity model works like gravity for heavenly bodies. The larger the larger the body, the more it attracts, and the further away it is, the less it attracts. So in this case, you've got a bunch of labor pools. The Bay Area is a very large one. Sacramento is medium-sized. Stockton is smaller. And depending on their size, they have a certain number of workers available. And depending on their drive distance, travel time, those workers are more or less willing to work at these sites. So these are used in traffic models all the time. So using the known labor pool and the gravity model, we forecast the residential distribution of project workers and determine the likely path taken from the homes to the work sites. So all those are in-person trips. We then have to convert it into vehicle trips using vehicle occupancy, including the effects of things like carpooling incentives and park and ride lots. So you might have 10 different cars arriving to a park and ride lot, and then it gets converted into a single a shuttle bus. And with that, here is what we considered would be the catchment area for the labor force. The project sites are in these areas here. Goes as far north as Yuba City, as far south as Modesto and San Jose, as far to the west as San Francisco, far to the east as Placerville. Again, depending on the size of the pool, they would be adding more potential workers. Depending on their distance, they would be providing less. Based on the gravity model, we expect that about—
I'm sorry, Don, I was muted. Is this a good place to perhaps to stop and answer some questions, or do you have just a couple more slides before there's a natural pause spot?
There's a natural pause in a few slides.
Perfect.
So
Thank
what
you
I'm
so
going to
much.
do is go through the methodology, then we'll pause and give people a break, answer questions, and then take a break, and then we'll go into the results.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, so using the gravity model, we predicted that for the construction sites in the north part of the study area, about 69% of the workers would come from Sacramento or points north, a smaller amount from the Bay Area, and from Stockton and Lodi. In the south area, we would expect most of the workers to be coming from the Bay Area, either along Route 4 or 580. And again, a substantial amount from Stockton and the Central Valley. So if somebody has, for example, a type of job that is available in 10 of these sites, the expectation is that they wouldn't drive past 7 sites and then go to the 8th one. They would pick one of the sites that's closer to them until that site's filled, and then they might go to one that's further away. So this sort of distribution is normal. However, and with that, there are certain job classifications that simply aren't in the sites that's closest to someone's home. They may have to go to a site further away. So that's why there's a distribution both from the north and the south. It isn't an all or nothing assignment. So we're done. That's it. We're done talking about the approach and the methodology, and we'll be getting into the results in a few minutes. But if someone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now.
All right. Angelica is raising her hand. Angelica.
Hi, quick question. Just for clarification, as a part of the CEQA process, are you guys conducting another traffic study that's current? I think you mentioned the last one you had done was in 2018.
So this is Carrie. I can probably help with that a bit. So we were hoping to go out and do traffic monitoring this summer, but with the current COVID situation, traffic patterns are different, and we don't expect them to be similar to what we would expect in the future for quite some time. So the information that we have is relatively recent, and Don could probably speak to that level of information. But we will be doing in the CEQA process more monitoring and modeling. Sorry, more modeling. The monitoring we'll do if traffic returns to normal, and we think that we can accomplish that.
And just to piggyback off of that, has there been an analysis of the agricultural traffic separate from the the day-to-day traffic that's along the Delta?
Our original plan was to do traffic counts at 4 different times of the year in order to get the seasonal differences. Events have overtaken us, and that's not possible. If it becomes possible, I would still recommend doing that. What we do have is information from the Caltrans facilities that have embedded loops and that are continuously collecting information. So we have some information about seasonality from that.
Okay, yeah, I just worry about those. I don't know if you guys have ever seen what a harvesting, a grape harvesting truck and looks like. They're pretty big. They take up the whole road. So just curious what's been done there.
Well, that's what gets us into what I'm talking about, design standards, and why we're saying
Yeah.
we want 12-foot lanes. It's exactly that. We're talking about trucks that need to pass each other and maneuver safely, and possibly with a bicyclist on one side. So yes, we are taking that into consideration.
We have a few folks with their hands up in order. It's Anna, Gil, Cece, Lindsay, Karen, and then Angelica, your hand is still up, and then Mel. So Anna, go ahead, Anna.
So I have a couple of questions. The first thing is, could you please clarify what the statement DWR is not subject to local regulations? That always makes me worry. And then 6-foot shoulders going through Stones Lake makes me worry, because we're going to be taking a valuable habitat that we've fought so hard to create and maintain, which is now going to be taken up so that giant trucks can come and, do their thing here. And then the census information. So I know I just recently filled out a census survey, which means you're using old census information. And that really concerns me, and I wish that you would use the current census information that will be coming out soon. And finally, Caltrans is not always the best model for how to approach traffic in the Delta. There have been many times just in the recent weeks where they promised us that one bridge would be closed up here in the North Delta, and lo and behold, 2 are closed. And signs are not accurate, and detours lead you to nowhere. And so the idea that Caltrans is your expert regarding traffic in the Delta really frightens me, because they don't seem to have a good grasp of working here, despite the fact that they've been working here for years and years and years. And so don't use them as a model for communication. Don't use them as a model for signage, and definitely don't use their data as to how much traffic is, because they will tell you themselves they are highly surprised at how many people are quote unquote on the road when we're in the middle of planting season here in the Delta, heart of the agricultural center of Sacramento. Thank you.
Oh, okay, so you've got the multi-parts there. Let me see if I can remember them correctly. Okay, first off, regarding Caltrans, We are not using a Caltrans methodology, though Caltrans does use a very similar methodology for forecasting. This is best practices for traffic engineering, has been for a long time. We haven't spoken about design standards from Caltrans. These are ones that we're developing. Number two, with regard to DCA being a state agency not subject to local regulation, the way state law has this, if I was going to build a house or something in this area, I would be subject to the jurisdiction, to whatever jurisdiction I'm in, their regulations regarding whether or not a traffic impact study would be required and how it would be done, that sort of thing. The state agencies have a different set of rules, especially in a project that's going through a bunch of different jurisdictions. State agencies, the lead agency sets the thresholds. It can take into consideration the local ones if it wishes to. In this case, as you can see, the thresholds that we're using for the planning study. I'm not saying what's going to be used for the environmental analysis, but it is very consistent with the local jurisdictions. Number three, regarding Stone Lakes and the bike lane, we'll get into that in a little while. There are a number of options that are on the table, and we'd like to get your input on this. There was something else I don't remember. What we are taking from Caltrans is embedded loops. So they've got data. They're continuously collecting information from embedded loops and from videos and other things that helps their traffic management center react to different incidents on the roads and helps them plan maintenance and that kind of thing. That's the information that we're getting from Caltrans.
The last thing was the census.
Oh, the census thing, yes. Okay, so the census used to be done once every 10 years, still is for certain purposes, but there's also what's called the American Community Survey that's done on a more or less continuous basis. And so this information is not old. The information, if you've done your census form, there may or may not have been something on it on occupation, but the American Community Survey, which is updated all the time, is constantly surveying and constantly getting us information regarding occupations. So the information is not from 10 years old, though I will say it is based on existing information. So this is where workers exist now. At some time in the project, if there was, for example, training programs and things, you could create new construction workers.
Awesome.
And
What's it called? I'm sorry. What's the survey called?
The American Community Survey.
Okay, I found it. Thank you.
All right, Gil Cosio and then Cece.
I just have a quick question, Don. I missed what you said about Highway 160. My internet broke up, but you were describing the with and without project, and you said something about Highway 160.
Oh, yes. Okay, let me get to that slide. What we are saying is that for one of our scenarios, when I present the results and we're going to present what the no project scenario is, then the project, if all the trucks use existing roads, all the trucks and cars, and then this is the final one is with remedial actions. The one exception is that Highway 160, where even without other remedial actions, we would certainly have a haul road so that to allow truck traffic to get to the intake sites from the east rather than using 160 and come from the west, because there are lots of good reasons for not putting a lot of trucks on 160.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Cece and then Lindsay.
I'm concerned that you're going all the way back to 2018. Our traffic has increased so extremely in each year. Can you at least access data for 2019? I know Caltrans is constantly collecting data, and perhaps they would cooperate and provide that for you.
Okay, we do get data from Caltrans, from their PEMS. That's the freeway performance monitoring system. So the stuff we have on the Caltrans facilities is quite recent. The stuff that we have for other places, we have updated the counts. We factored them up based on the growth projections from SACOG and SJCOG. So we didn't just take raw traffic volumes from some previous year and use them. We did anticipate that there would be some growth. Things are a little bit strange in this area in that some of the traffic before the Great Recession was actually higher than traffic more recently. But we're using the best available data.
That's true. But 2019 was very bad, very heavy traffic. That's why I'm concerned.
Yeah. So that's why in this, for example, this was 2018, which is the most recent congestion management plan program. This is the most recent one from SJCOG.
Hey, Don, can you blow that up? It might be difficult for people to
sure.
see. I'm sorry.
That's a good suggestion. So what you're looking at is, this is the 2018 data that was from SJCOG for their congestion management plan. This is, they were using for the 2019, which is the most recent version of their congestion monitoring and performance report, used data from the year before. We updated this, and we're using data from the Penn system that is pre-COVID and as close as we can get. So I think we were using stuff from like last November.
Okay.
And we do have growth factors, as I said, the growth factors that came from the traffic models from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments and San Joaquin Council of Governments.
Terrific. All right, Lindsay and then Karen Mann.
Yeah, I just wanted to really, iterate that regardless of COVID, agricultural traffic will be the same amount it always has been for this year. People are moving at the same capacity as far as harvest goes. So to be able to do those studies to look specifically at agricultural harvest, both in the summer and in the fall, that will be able to be, calculated appropriately, because there's no impact to construction or to agricultural traffic due to COVID right now, because everything's working at the same speed. So I really think that's important, especially, was mentioned about grape trucks, also pear trucks, and those things that can, be looked at, very easily. Additionally too, I echo what Anna said about Caltrans, working with Caltrans. We have tried numerous times to work directly with them when it comes to, making sure that at least one bridge stays open, and those things, because no matter what we do to, to ask for that, we're having, issues with agricultural traffic, with some of the Caltrans projects as well. So again, just something to be considerate of.
Okay. Yeah. I went through all the comments from the previous EIR, and I saw that that seasonality and whether it's recreational traffic on weekends or agricultural traffic was a big concern, and that's why we plan to have to count the same locations at different times of the year, specifically to do that. And I wish it had worked out that way, but and hopefully things will get back to whatever normal is going to be, and then we can do that, because your point is well taken. It's loud and clear, and we want their data to be right.
All right, terrific. Karen Mann, and then Dr. Lytle, and then Jim Wallace.
Hi, thank you, Don, for such a thorough report. I'd like to start off I've got 4 questions. So the first question is, I noticed that you used San Joaquin County data and Sacramento County data. Why wasn't Eastern Contra Costa County included in your research and analysis? Because they may have some very good traffic information regarding Highway 4.
We did look at at their material, and also looked at a number of other studies. For example, there's a study going down on Byron Highway. It's like the Tri-Link study and other things. We took a look at a number of studies, but for the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to concentrate on what was going on in San Joaquin and Sacramento counties. We did take a look at those the other
Contra Costa
counties.
County is going to be adversely affected significantly. We're in the D and F category based on your charts.
Yes, and you're going to see later on that the traffic situation is quite interesting, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the results. That the north, the middle, and the south parts are quite different, and the south part definitely has existing traffic conditions that are challenging.
Yeah, we're in all that every day. My next question is, so Highway 4 is kind of an interesting route because on Highway 4, there are 3 bridges between Stockton and Discovery Bay, or the maintenance shaft, or the proposed maintenance shaft, excuse me. And these bridges, when semi trucks go on these bridges, they have to take 2 lanes to get onto the bridge because the bridges are quite narrow. They're certainly less than 12 feet wide per lane. And so how do you work around these 100-year-old bridges? Because there's no shoulder. I mean, literally, it is side mirrors to side mirrors when we take Highway 4 and go that route between Brentwood, Discovery Bay to Stockton. How are you going to remediate the historical bridges?
Excellent question. There is, and later on in the presentation, I will be discussing one bridge in particular. I will say that most of our stuff will be coming from the east rather than from the west, and depending on the alignment that we use, we might be able to avoid some of those bridges.
Actually, oh, so then the trucks are able to float across the river?
No, if materials coming from the east, from I-5,
from Stockton, yeah.
Yeah, depending on where the location is, so that they may not be crossing the Sacramento River.
No, there's no Sacramento River there. There's the old river. It's Highway 4. Right. It's on the south part, and that's the primary route for commuters between Stockton and the East Bay.
Hey, Karen.
And so these 2 bridges take 2 lanes.
Yeah, sorry, Karen. When we get to the results section, let's talk about that. We've got something in there to try to get off the peak period for that very reason. We saw the photos that you sent, and when we get down to the South region and we're talking about Highway 4, let's talk about that.
Okay.
But you're blowing his cover. You're blowing his cover on those results.
No spoilers. Come on.
Yeah, really. Spoiler alert.
Hey, I live and breathe and drive this traffic every single day. So I think I know the roads pretty well. So that's why I asked those questions. And then on Byron Highway, we do have agricultural traffic and school traffic. I want to make sure that you're aware that we have a school actually on Byron Highway.
We're certainly aware of the issues on Byron Highway and have been struggling with it for the last few weeks on that. And it's the last part of my presentation.
Okay, and my last question, I promise it's my last question, at least on this subject. So on the Highway 4 route, unless this is part of your how you're going to correct it, the remediation, how about access for emergency equipment on Highway 4? As you know, Highway 4 is 2 fairly narrow lanes on a bumpy levee road. And right now, when there's an accident, as Catherine mentioned, I sent a picture of a truck that blocked traffic for 8 to 10 hours, both ways. What would happen to your trucks? They would be stuck in the middle of Highway 4.
We're not actually planning to send a lot of trucks on Highway 4, which you'll see if we get to the results.
Okay, I'll leave you be. Thank you for taking the time to answer my questions.
You're welcome, and we'll have more later.
All right, Dr. Lytle.
Yes, thank you.
Just actually really quick, Dr. Lytle, it's going to be you, Jim Wallace, Douglas Gia, Cece, and then Jim Cox, and then I think we're going to cut it off there and move forward.
Yeah, let's try to stick to the methodology that he talked about, because he's going to get into the results, and that's going to spur a whole bunch of dialogue once you see the traffic impacts.
Okay, thank you. Just one quick question, referring back to slide 16. I think it was a histogram of the travel.
Um,
16.
16. This one.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm a little bit colorblind, so it's a little hard for me, but I'm most interested in the truck traffic regarding the tunnel muck or spoil or RTM, whatever you call it. I'm just wondering if there's an actual quantity that's been proposed as far as the tunnel muck.
Yes.
So that is one of the bars on here. And at the next SEC meeting, we're going to go through the whole mass balance on that for every site. But it is a blue bar on the truckload graphs that you'll see.
Okay. So
it's these big dark blue bars.
Okay. At the next meeting, then we're going to talk about the total amount.
Yeah, this one we're focused on traffic impacts. At the next meeting, we'll talk about the RTM and how it all moves around the delta as part of the project.
Yeah, I would suppose that the total quantity would affect the total sum of trucks on a monthly basis, for sure.
Awesome.
It absolutely does.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lytle. All right, Jim Wallace and then Douglas Shea.
Hi, thanks. Listen, at the beginning of Don's presentation, Don, you mentioned that CEQA does not allow the use or does not want to use level of service anymore. I don't think that's right. I mean, my understanding of SB 743 is that level of service cannot be the only factor in determining traffic impacts.
The way that it's being done is SB 743, SB 743 said that upon certification of the, or adoption of the revised CEQA guidelines, that automobile delay, for example, level of service, would no longer be used as a, to determine significance for CEQA. And so that happened in December 2018. Starting on July 1st, 2020, you have to use something else that matches some other metric that matches 3 goals that are in SB 743. Most agencies will be using vehicle miles traveled as the metric. Nearly all the state agencies are. So level of service, the SB 743 did allow level of service to continue to be used for other purposes. For example, transportation mitigation fees or general plans, and nearly all of the jurisdictions in the state intend to do that. So level of service is not going away, but it is going away for the purposes of CEQA.
So just to, if this is Carrie, I'd just like to jump in for a minute. So we will be looking at vehicle miles traveled as our way of determining significance in the CEQA document, but we are planning to do a level of service analysis as well to inform the document. It just won't be the way that we determine significant impacts.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great clarifying question, Douglas. Oh, wait, okay, Douglas. You guys are shifting on me. Douglas, you're up, and you might be muted.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Well, 2 weeks ago, I provided a suggestion to DCA, which is from my constituent. And the suggestion is to widen the Yearson Road. Yearson Road is between Twin City Road and Lambert Road. And I don't know whether this is under your consideration.
I don't want to give a spoiler.
That sounds like a results question, Douglas.
Yeah, it's a results question. When we go through each individual area, then we're going to be discussing those kinds of questions. But I'm glad you set it up. Okay, I like to give people what they want. Looks like somebody wants to know the answer to that question.
That was a teaser, Douglas. That's what you did. You set it up so that now we're all wanting to know. Okay, Cece, and then Jim Cox, you took yourself off. I'm assuming that that you don't have a question, but just let me know. Cece, go ahead. Cece, you may be muted.
I most certainly was. Thank you. just two quick things. To mention that a couple hours ago, Highway 12 was completely gridlocked, and that happens with fair regularity. And the other is that I feel it's very important that East Contra Costa County be included in information.
Okay. It was included, and it will continue to be included. And my although I will not be doing the EIR traffic study, I assume that it will continue to be used in that as well.
Okay.
We don't have graphics for that.
Well, that's true. The graphics that I was showing were basically showing were two model areas. There's actually another model area for there's Contra Costa on one side, and Alameda is also part of this study area.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's continue.
Actually, maybe this could be a good time for a 5-minute break, so people can stretch their legs. Oh,
okay. We've only been going an hour. A 5-minute break will work. Is everyone okay with that, or do we want to? Is everyone? Okay. A 5-minute break is fine.
Yeah. So we'll be back. We will all come back at in 5 minutes. We'll be back at like
4:15. Yeah.
Okay. So our 5 minutes are up. If everybody's ready to start again, let's get back to Don and his presentation of results, and this will bring in some of the things that people have been worrying about. Valerie, you're on mute.
Don, are you back?
He's not back yet.
Okay.
I'm back.
You're back.
COVID or not, I was coming over, Don. All right.
No,
Go ahead.
my docs needed some attention. Okay, so let's talk about the results now that everybody's comfortable. Okay. So because this is such a big area, and because the traffic situation is quite different in different parts of it, we divided this into 3 regions. You know, the north, as you can see up here, which goes from the intakes down to New Hope and Staten Island. And then the middle part, which is mainly the parts that are coming off of State Route 12. And then the south part, which are the sites that feed off of State Route 4 and then Byron Highway, the parts that feed off Byron Highway in the south. So in the north, we've got the intake locations. There are 2 different scenarios here, but for traffic purposes, they're not that different. The one in the dark blue shows a combination of intakes 2 and 3, and then there would also be a site at Lambert and then down to Glanville. The other option would be to take intakes 3 and 5, in which case there would not be a site at Lambert. Hood Franklin would have a materials depot. There's batch plants at Lambert and at Twin Cities. So those are the facilities. Now, there's 3 options for getting materials to these intake locations. So option 1 is stuff comes off of I-5, it goes down Hood Franklin and then turns north to intakes 2 or 3, or south to intake 5. And you could do that. This would be that haul road that I was discussing, so that trucks would not be going through Hood and along 160. This is a haul road that runs along an old railroad track. The second option, instead of getting off of it at Hood Franklin, we could send
Don,
things.
can we clarify that haul road runs to the west of the railroad, not on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me see if I can just grab a map and show you where that haul road would be located.
It's just along the west side of it. It's not on it. I just wanted to make sure there was a clarification, because we keep getting asked if we're impacting that railroad, and we're not on it.
No, we're not on that railroad. There's.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you come over the bridge, you can see it's a little laggy.
It's okay.
Give it a moment. So the railroad runs along an embankment. We would be in this right of way here. And I think it connects up to a road and down further on. That's where the haul road would be.
Okay, thanks.
Where are we? Okay, so so one option is to use Hood Franklin. The other option would be to get traffic off of at Twin Cities Road, then go to the east, go up Franklin Boulevard, then Lambert, and then down to a new haul road, and again going off to intake 5, 3, or 2, depending on which of those were selected. The third route, instead of turning east on Twin Cities Road, you would turn west on Twin Cities Road and then go up a different haul route along the power line, and then the haul route that runs along the railroad tracks. So there's different combinations. You could use any of these three. You could use all of these three. You could do 70% on one route and 30% on another, or split it 50-50 between two of them. Let me show you what the traffic effects would be of doing that. So when we look at the truck deliveries to the intakes, as you can see, this green in here is spoil. There is quite a lot of it that's coming out. The peak month would be in January of year 5. And when we did our traffic evaluation, it was based on the peak month, the peak of the peak. So you can see this is a very sharp peak, and we'll get into discussions of what we could do about that. But that's what we used for evaluation. The future no project conditions, the roads in this area have a very good level of service. The amount of traffic in comparison with the capacity of a 2-lane road is low. Even without remedial actions, there wouldn't be much of a problem. It would get to level of service D on Hood Franklin, sorry, not Hood Franklin, on Twin Cities, but that's allowable on Twin Cities. With remedial action, it becomes even less. So there really isn't a traffic problem up here, as long as we do some road improvements. So this is the haul road that goes from the east into these intakes. Now there's a number of other things depending on the route you selected. You might, for example, if we chose to use the Hood Franklin route, then we'd want to widen those to 12-foot lanes and adequate shoulders. If we chose not to do Hood Franklin, then we wouldn't be doing that widening. We might do the work on Lambert or on Dearson. So that's what you were asking. There is a batch plant here, or a supply depot, with deliveries by rail. You could widen Dearson to 2 12-foot lanes and a 4-foot shoulder in order to get materials to and from the Glanville site. So we wouldn't be doing all of these improvements. Depending on what it is you selected, we would do some subset of those.
And just a reminder to keep everyone muted, please, if you're not talking. Thank you. Sorry, Don.
Sure. So we've got it's depending on, again, which option you've got. You might have a park and ride lot here. You might have it down here. There's a batch plant here or a supply depot. So there's a number of things we could do in terms of road improvements. Now, suppose we decided that Hood Franklin was the option that, for whatever reason, was selected. What we find is, shown here in blue, is the no project or background traffic. And you can see it's very low in comparison with the capacity of the road. What's shown in dark gray is truck traffic, and that's already been converted into passenger car equivalents. So for each of those trucks, each truck is the equivalent of 3 cars, and that's why these look pretty large. In terms of total vehicles, it's actually less than that. And then you can see a very small amount of car traffic because we would be having our workers use park and ride. And so then go in on shuttle buses. There would be a certain number of cars, but it would be few. So if we split it 50-50, half the traffic to one intake would use Hood Franklin, the traffic to the other one would use one of the other routes. The situation would be as shown on the left. If we used Hood Franklin as the only route, didn't use the other two, it would be as shown on the right. Because the traffic is so low, the existing capacity would be sufficient to accommodate the project traffic while maintaining an acceptable level of service. Okay, that being said, that doesn't mean we wouldn't want to improve the road. And that is for the safety reasons that we were talking about before. Hood Franklin does have narrow lanes, 10 or 11 feet in some places. We would want to widen those to 12 feet. This is part of a bicycle master plan with the idea that there would be bicyclists on this. So at least on one side, we'd want a 6-foot shoulder, on the other side, a 4-foot shoulder. This would allow trucks to pass each other safely without slowing down too much. And if they shy away to the right, we don't want the shoulder crumbling away and causing longitudinal cracking along the road, which you can see in some of the roads in the Delta region. So we are very well aware of the fact that this is a sensitive area, and that is why we are bringing this up for a discussion as to whether or not we'd want to do this. So let me go through the other 3 routes, and then we can stop and talk about the north. So if we decided not to do Hood Franklin, but use Lambert instead, Lambert, the amount of background traffic is even less because Lambert doesn't have an interchange with I-5. There's very little traffic on it. If it was used for one intake, you'd get like a level of service A. If you use if you used it for both intakes, didn't use either of the other routes, it would still be fine. The level of service would be very good. Even if all the traffic to the intakes were to use Lambert.
Hey, Don, one of the things I want to point out on Lambert is we took a look at that Lambert interchange that we were proposing, and we thought it's a better idea to use the existing interchange at Twin Cities and then head north up Franklin to Lambert rather than putting that new interchange in.
Right, so that's part of the, as Catherine said, that's why we're doing this analysis, so that we can figure out what components need to be part of the project and figuring out what the project footprint is. It turns out we don't believe that that interchange is necessary, and so it wouldn't need to be part of the project. So this is Lambert Road. Twin Cities Road, traffic's higher. If it was used for one intake, it would be level of service C without our project. Our project would push it into level of service D, which according to the county standards and the thresholds that are used by DCA, that would be acceptable. If we used it for both intakes, it would go up even higher into level of service D during the peak hours. But in either case, that would still be acceptable. Okay, so that's what's going on in the north. The main story here is that unlike the other 2 locations, which we will discuss later, here the problem is there really isn't a capacity problem. There is plenty of capacity on any one of these routes. The question is, what route would be the least impactful from the point of view of the communities, and including the improvements that we'd have to do.
So Sean, you may have spent the most time thinking about this. I don't know if you wanted to comment at all. And I appreciate the note about 160 as well.
Yeah.
I'll also note, just real quick, Sean, I'm sorry, there is a hand up. I see it, Cece. Just one moment. We'll get you right after Sean.
It's going to have a pretty substantial impact, obviously, on the wildlife species that use the refuge. What is the possibility of moving that haul road much closer to the toe of the levee for the river? So substantially to the west. You've got it basically on the toe of the railroad line, which is more or less the preserve boundary. What if we shifted it much closer to the Sacramento River? So not on Highway 160, but something that more or less paralleled it on the toe on the east side of that eastern levee.
So you'd head further west before you veered off onto a haul road,
Right.
closer to Hood. Or if you use Lambert, you'd just head in closer before you veered off.
Exactly. The thinking would be that if birds were flushed, they would be flushed towards the refuge. as opposed to being essentially caught in a situation where they've got a road between themselves and the refuge, and you're also farther from the refuge boundary.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't looked at it in depth. I was considering that today after your email. I think that would be far less impactful.
Yeah, look what Don just pulled up here. I think that's why we were thinking of going on the toe of that railroad. But maybe there's another, yeah. We'll have to take a close look at this.
I mean, it's a haul road, so you're making it out of what's there on the ground. In terms of species, we should at least consider the possibility of the toe of that levee.
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of Route 1 versus Route 2, is going along the north edge less impactful than going north and south along this edge?
They're both pretty bad. I'm working on that right now. I don't have a definitive answer for you.
Okay. And then, we brought in, since our last meeting, we brought in Twin Cities as an option. So you see that as a new one to spread it out even more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're struggling, scratching our heads on this one too.
The haul road, the new haul roads are more problematic than widening existing roads for sure.
Okay, we have Cece, Jim Wallace, and Anna Swenson who have their hands up. Cece?
I have a question. On your graphic of truck trips, they don't appear to include hauling of borrow fill for the intake sites, do they?
Yes, they do. You can see the fill from the job site that's shown in blue. It's a much bigger deal in other sites than it is in this one.
Okay.
We've balanced the material at that site fairly well. So there's very little hauling of borrow here.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim Wallace.
All right, thanks. Just two quick questions. One is, if you improve the intersection at I-5 and Hood Franklin, does that involve the Federal Highways Administration?
If I would want to hear from one of the engineers, but I believe that that Caltrans has the jurisdiction over this, but it does get federal funds. My understanding is there is already some discussion about improvements to that intersection with related to a different project.
Okay, well, I'll wait to get clarity from the engineers. And then secondly, I don't want to tip over Sean, but the question was, what do the communities think? I don't think running truck traffic through Hood to put it next to the levee, which is a project levee on the Sacramento River, is a good idea. I mean, maybe there's no great route for this, but keeping it out of Hood, I think is the best way to go. And but of course, it's just a haul route, right? It's not going to be a route for general use. So without knowing exactly how many trips that is, I mean, I think, Sean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you might have a more difficult time trying to figure out what the impacts are to wildlife.
Well, two things. That is a dedicated haul road that would just be used for the project. And then there is an appendix to this presentation that you have that goes through the truck histogram for each individual site and the route to each individual site. So that there's a lot more detail than just what Don has put into these diagrams here. So the exact truck traffic is, like you could take intake 2. Do you want to pull that up real quick in the appendix there?
I'm not, let me see, I'm not sure how I can find it.
It'll be the first truck histogram when you start the appendix. It's the very first one. Histogram. Nope, next one.
This one?
Can you read the top?
That's
intake 2.
Intake 2.
So there you go. So every single site is in there for you guys to study more in the appendix. We just didn't want to put it at that level of detail. What his histogram has is both of the intakes in a combined chart, because that's what would be driving on Hood Franklin.
And to that, I want to note that please do take a look at, you know, the materials, not just rely on the presentation, and feel free to send over emails or questions or whatever. We'll add that to the Q&A matrix so that everyone gets the benefit of that information. But that's exactly what that document is for as a tool. So that as you're going through on a Wednesday night or on a Thursday night or, you know, whatever, and you're reviewing, you can go ahead and send over those emails and we can go ahead and address that in again, an alternate public forum.
Yeah.
Okay, Anna and then Sean Worth.
So I have two comments. My first comment is I'm confused why you're not including traffic information for Yolo County. Just as all things in the Delta, we are all connected. Traffic in Yolo County affects traffic in Sacramento County and San Joaquin and Contra Costa and whatnot. So they're all connected and it's important to consider all of them. And then my other comment is this is one of the most draconian things I've ever had to contemplate, because the idea of driving those trucks through that preserve that we love and cherish and have worked so hard on really makes my heart sad. And then the idea of driving that truck then for further injury through the town of Hood, which is a very peaceful, relatively quiet place, is even worse. The statement that there's no capacity issues on these roads, to me, is actually ludicrous, because I've sat in traffic on all three of those roads, and all it takes is one incident to create a situation that can last hours and hours and hours before you can pass. So the idea of choosing one of them, you know, Twin Cities is one of the rockiest, bumpiest roads I've ever been on, and you know, that should be a capacity limiter at that. And then my final thought is, you know, I think about Snodgrass Slough, and I think about how no matter what, you're going to be impacting that slough with these trucks, and I feel a lot of concern for that slough. It's one of my favorites here in the Delta, and I really am excited to see some empirical data that'll prove to us that no damage will happen to that slough or the estuary, or or the reserve out there and preserve out there, and I'm looking forward to that information. Thank you.
Okay, just if I can respond, this is multi-part, so I'm going to have a multi-part response. You'll notice that none of these three routes go through the town of Hood. They would all go, the purpose of this haul road is to make sure that trucks don't have to go through Hood. So this would allow us to go in from the east side rather than drive through Hood and along 160 and approach from the west. So that is the purpose of this haul road, is so that all the traffic turns off before it reaches Hood, no matter which route is selected. Regarding Twin Cities roads, we do have this in the event that this was selected as the route. There would be improvements made to Twin Cities Road for the reasons that you gave.
Good. All right. Sean Worth.
I just wanted to reply a little bit to Jim's comment. Knowing the amount of truck traffic, it's really going to be a matter of, are we flushing wildlife 5 times an hour or 20 times an hour? Neither really are acceptable. So having a configuration for that road that if we end up flushing wildlife, we're flushing them at least into a safe area, would be preferable to flushing them to an unsafe area. Hence, it's worth at least considering some route to the west.
Okay. Good feedback. Go ahead, Don.
Okay, with that, that's the north. So the story in the north is we've got choices. There's capacity. Things are a bit different in the middle and the south, as you're about to see.
Hey, Don, before we get started, so Karen, man, you thought I was biased by always doing Central first and then Eastern, so we decided to flip it for you. We're going to start with Eastern and then we'll go to Central, okay?
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that.
So this is the middle region for the East.
You're still in the north.
This is the middle region. Okay, so this is the middle region for the eastern alignment. There are maintenance shafts here. Maintenance shafts don't have a lot of activity compared to the launch shafts or the intakes, so relatively little. There is a retrieval shaft here where which you'd have to dig the shaft, and then same as the maintenance, but these are relatively low activity areas. It has a very distinct peak for a terminus track. That's generated by bringing in hauling excavated material from the Glanville site to the shaft site. So there was a question earlier about moving around fill material from one place to another, and this is an example of where that would happen. As you can see, this is a very sharp peak, and so there are different things we could do about this. But this is, as we analyzed it, the peak would occur in August of year 1. Looked at this, and we found that in the no project conditions, Highway 12 would have level of service E, which it already has, and our project would push it into level of service F. There are certain remedial actions that we could take that would push it back to level of service E, which is what it would be in the no project condition. What the sorts of remedial actions that we've got? Well, this is the physical improvements. We could dampen the peak deliveries by spreading the work out over a longer period of time. So if we have this very distinct peak, if we did spread this over 4 or 5 months, this peak would go down and we would have less impact. So that's spreading it among a period of weeks and a period of months. We could construct turn pockets, which would allow turning movements that wouldn't delay the vehicles behind them. And we are talking about east and west turn pockets at the shaft site. We've got a minor haul route that's being done to the Brack track site. Okay, State Route 12. If you look at the blue, that's the background traffic. You can see it's into level of service E already without the project. And in fact, level of service F at certain hours of the day. The project does add traffic, but it's less than 10%. So based on our criteria, the level of service is poor, but it's not poor because of us. It's poor because of all the other traffic that's using that road. So what are options? What actions could we take so that we would, so the traffic congestion on State Route 12 doesn't interfere with our project and that we don't interfere with traffic on State Route 12? One part, as I said before, is we could deliver the borrow material over a longer period of time so that we would dampen the peak. Instead of having that one sharp peak, we would have it would be spread out over more months. Secondly, we could expand State Route 12 from I-5 over to the shaft site, which is about 2.5 miles. Or we could move the material instead of, if the problem is congestion during the day, if we moved it at night, we could get away from that congestion so that the background traffic would not interfere with us and we wouldn't interfere with the background traffic. And we're also considering alternative designs that might reduce the size and the height of the construction pads, so there's just less material that would need to be moved. All of those things are under consideration. If we shift to the central alignment, so the eastern alignment went along here, the central alignment's much further to the west in Bolden Island. This is where the launch shaft is. If we have a barge landing, it would be on the south side of Bolden Island. Here you can see that the peak, we've got about a 6-month peak. The basis for analysis was April in year 2. All of this, similar to the eastern alignment, is site preparation activities where we're taking borrow material from Glanville and moving it to Bolden Island. If we put a barge landing on Bolden Island, what we find, and what's shown here in the brown is what the truck volumes would be without a barge landing. What's shown in blue is the truck volumes with a barge landing. So you can see the barge landing really helps reduce the truck volumes in the later years, which is always a good thing from an environmental standpoint. It doesn't really help us during the peak period though, which occurs earlier in the project in years 1 and 2. So it solves a problem, but it doesn't solve the traffic problem. So what we find is that the no project condition, it's level of service E, and as I'll show you in a moment, our project, we add our traffic on, it pushes it to level of service F. There are remedial measures that we could do that would move it up to level of service A or B, which would be better than the no project condition. So what that would be, it would be to widen State Route 12 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes from I-5 over to where our project is. Then we'd put a new interchange there so that vehicles going eastbound could turn left and onto our project site without interfering or slowing down traffic going in the other direction. And traffic from our site could turn left out, and again, and not interfere with the traffic going in the other direction. We'd construct turn pockets at different sites, construct an interchange here. We're looking at whether an existing undercrossing might be converted for use in project traffic. We are discussing the Bolden Island barge landing, which would have the effect that I showed in the graph earlier. And we would have park and ride lots in Rio Vista and at Flag City, so that we wouldn't also be putting car traffic onto this. The one problem that we've got, we look on here in terms of widening this road, is the Potato Slough Bridge. Potato Slough Bridge is large. It's half a mile long, difficult to widen. It could be widened. You could not restripe this into 4 lanes or anything because you need the breakdown lane for a bridge of this length. It would form a bottleneck. There's things we can do for traffic to make it move as smoothly as possible, but this would be a 2-lane section in what would otherwise be a 4-lane road. So this is showing the traffic volumes on State Route 12. As I said, it's level of service E, even in the midday. Off-peak, it goes into level of service F already without our project. In the evening peak hour, we would be adding some additional traffic to it. If we did the remediation of widening State Route 12 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, what would happen is the traffic wouldn't change, but the capacity of the road would change a lot. And so you'd go from level of service E or F, you'd go to level of service A or B, because the road would be wider and could certainly accommodate this. So the options that we've got are, we could expand State Route 12 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. We'd still need to figure out what it is we're going to do with Potato Slough Bridge, whether we'd need to widen that bridge or take some other measure. If we did that and you made the investment to widen State Route 12, then there really isn't any need for the barge landing, because the barge landing, the period of time that we'd be using the barge landing, the project volumes aren't that high anyway. Another option is don't move the excavated material from Glanville to Bolden during the day when there's traffic. If we moved it at night, then we wouldn't have to widen State Route 12. But there are other non-traffic issues. There might be noise and light issues and other things that's in someone else's area of expertise. The other way is that for the peak months, when you're in the site preparation, maybe that borrowed material could come from some other source that wouldn't require it to use State Route 12. So here are the options. You can see that using the central alignment rather than the eastern alignment does trigger quite a bit more traffic effects, and there are different options for dealing with them. And so with that, that's the middle portion. Let's be happy to answer any questions people have about either the eastern or the central alignment in the middle.
Go ahead and raise hands if you have questions. It's a good pause spot. Okay, we have Anna, Cece, and Sean. Anna.
I love the idea of widening Highway 12. I think it's needed this for a very long time. It's a big issue at various times of the day. It doesn't feel like a safe road to drive on. And so, you know, if your idea is to leave it better than you found it, that might be a good way to do that.
Okay. Cece, Sean, and David. Cece.
I just had a question. If you're going to barge spoils or material to Bolden Island, what route are you taking? Are you taking the McCollum?
We did the routes to Bolden in the last package. You can go back and reference that. But no, it was coming from the San Joaquin.
Oh, it was from the San Joaquin. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a map in the last meeting pack.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And Sean.
For the State Route 12 road widening, does your analysis take in consideration induced demand? You mentioned that traffic will not change, but that does not appear to be the case in most traffic studies that consider road widening.
Well, that's part of the reason why under CEQA they moved away from level of service, because there is a body of literature that suggests that if you increase the capacity of the road, it might induce additional demand. In this particular case, we would be widening this portion of it, and so we would be improving the level of service here, but not for the remainder of the route. And this would be helping people, certainly would be solving a local problem, and it would be a leave behind that might be, you know, appreciated. But most of the people that are driving this route are going quite a long distance to between their houses and their jobs. And you would only be improving a small portion of their total trip. So I don't think it would have a very strong induced demand effect, but it might have some.
Okay.
You could expect that to be analyzed in the CEQA document.
Yes, that would be part of the CEQA document.
All right, we have David, Karen Mann, and Jim Cox. David Lasky.
Yeah, thank you. I think that widening State Route 12 would obviously be a great regional benefit, and actually probably save lives. There's probably going to be less accidents, you know, all around, and just safety would be so much better. Another question I had is when you compared the east and the west in this area, the eastern alignment had, you know, 4 facilities in it, like a couple of maintenance shafts and a retrieval. And then when you looked at the eastern, there was just 1 facility. Can you explain why one of them has 1 facility and the other one has 4 facilities?
But I can do that. They have about the same number of facilities. It's just that Staten Island and New Hope on that central alignment were covered in the north map. So if you look at, they're both green. They're not heavily trafficked roads, so we didn't cover it in this presentation. We were focused on the intakes in the north. Okay. But I think they are, if you look at, Don, if you go up to the chart there for the north, I think you'll see.
They're shown here.
Yeah, they're green. There's hardly any traffic on them, particularly the Staten Island one. Lots of birds, we know that, but not a lot of traffic there. So our load was, what was there was inconsequential.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. There's actually only 1 additional shaft on the east versus the central.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, all of that stuff is in the appendix. It's covered individually.
Karen Mann, and then Jim Cox.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, my question is, apparently last time when water fix was going on and whatnot, we were told that the water board, or actually not we were told, the water board agreed that the Bolden Island would not work due to the toxic fumes and the dust. It would send it into Tower Park. Now Tower Park has a full-time small residential manufactured home development, as well as a KOA family Jellystone Park campground. So I guess sending toxic fumes to a place where people live full time and where people, including children, recreate may not be the best move. So that's the only concern I have with Highway 12.
So this is Carrie. Could I chime in for just a minute on that one?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just quickly, Karen, the water board the last time around did not come to any findings. They were still in the hearing phase when the application for the change in point of diversion was withdrawn. So while there certainly were some concerns raised by protestants during that process, the conclusions weren't made. But I did want to highlight that the analysis of the air quality impacts to those communities will be part of the CEQA document.
Okay. Jim Cox.
Thank you, Karen.
I had one quick question on terminology here. Where you're saying haul borough material to site by barge, we're referring to the liners?
No, that would be like soil material so that we could do the site prep before we started construction of the shaft. So all of these sites need a bunch of material up front before we've necessarily got enough RTM to serve them. So borrow is, just excavated material from somewhere and bring it here. Because Glanville isn't accessible by barge, that's why we put that in there, is we'd have to find some other place where we could get borrow material that has barge access that we could then barge it up to Bolden Island. But I think what we found is that, by doing the 4 lanes on 12, and particularly if we fix Potato Slough Bridge, we built so much capacity onto Highway 12 that the barge landing becomes less necessary as a way to alleviate traffic on 12. So it's an idea that we had that before we had finished this modeling work. And then so that's why we threw that up there as an option.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No more questions. Don, go ahead and I'll just do a little time check. It's almost 5 o'clock, so just giving everyone a sense of what our timing is. Don, hit it.
Tell you what, I'd like to break in here for a second. It's almost 5 o'clock, and I think that this is probably a good time for me to cut out. And Barbara, you can take over. Are you there?
Yes, I am, Sarah.
Okay, good. Well, I just want to say, well, I'm sorry I have another meeting I have to be in. It's a strategic planning from my agency, and I want to thank everybody for for being here, and that it was wonderful as well. I just want to say one other thing. Having you guys come and speak in terms of your ad hoc group coming to speak at the board meeting was just really useful and enlightening. So thank you, and so long.
Okay, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So the theme in the north part was there are several different routes to choose from, all of which have available capacity, and you can spread the traffic out in whatever way would be the least impactful. The theme in the middle part was the State Route 12 is operating at or above capacity. It does not have is not able to absorb additional traffic without problems. So we break it, we would have to fix it for a portion of it, or we wouldn't actually break it. It would actually be broken when we got there. But there would be a problem, but it's a fixable problem. Now we get to the south, which is a different situation from either of those two. So for the eastern alignment, you've got the Lower Roberts launch shaft, you've got a couple of maintenance shafts, and then the southern complex, including the southern forebay and outlet control. There's a lot of activity going on in this area, and both and south of Byron Highway as well. This is another situation where the peak is moving the excavated material from the Delta Delta Conveyance outlet control structure south of Byron Highway to the 4-way north of Byron Highway. So if I can go here and let me skip out, what we've got is bear with me one moment. We've got a site that's south of Byron Highway, and it's producing a bunch of material. the material goes along, is driven along Byron Highway for a short distance, and then it's going to the north side of Byron Highway. It has a 6-month peak that is very high compared to the traffic at all other times of construction. State Route 4, this is a lot fewer traffic. You can see this is up to 20,000 vehicles that would be using Byron Highway, 20,000 a month. State Route 4, it's less, it's about 1/10 of that. Again, it would be moving excavated material to the shaft sites. These would be shorter, these would be much lower peaks and shorter in duration. So again, as I was saying before, we'd be producing a lot of material here that would then move along Byron Highway and then get moved to the north. We've got haul routes in serving the Lower Roberts site, the Lower Jones Track site, Victoria Island site, and then we're proposing a rail spur that would provide direct access to the southern complex. We've got some shoulder widening different places. We've got park and rides in different locations as well. So for this, for the Byron Highway load, which again exceeds 20,000 trucks in certain periods, we can produce a rail line. The rail line, if we put it in, would certainly reduce the traffic, would greatly reduce truck traffic that would be using Byron Highway, which I think would be to everyone's benefit. So without the rail is the brown bars, with rail is the blue bars, and you can see it has a dramatic effect. However, it doesn't lower the peak that much. And that's because when we're railing stuff in, we're bringing it from a long distance, the liners and all the other material. But for the peak, that's the stuff that's moving from south of Byron Highway to north of Byron Highway. It's moving a short distance and really is not amenable to being shipped by rail. So when we look at this, Byron Highway is already level of service F without the project. We add project traffic on to what was already a bad situation, and it would become level of service F for a longer distance. There are remedial actions that we can take, improvements along Byron Highway that would bring it back up to similar to the no project condition. But it would still be bad. So State Route 4, as I said, we've just got a few sites. They don't produce a lot of activity. Where the level of service is D, it gets up towards E in certain times. We're adding very little traffic to that. So from the point of view of this project, we're not a problem for State Route 4. They're not a problem for us. Byron Highway is a different story. It's already in level of service F for a multi-hour period, both in the morning and in the peak. It's in level of service E, even in the midday off-peak. So I'm sure most of the people on this call know the traffic is very bad there. If we added traffic, it would just make it worse. The problem here is that the existing traffic would cause problems for our project, not the other way around. So this traffic is so bad that we could not guarantee that our shipments would arrive on time. It would raise the cost because every truck trip or car trip would get stuck in traffic and would be moving. It would take much longer than it would if conditions were better. So here there's a problem. The problem is not directly related to the project. The project is affected by the problem that's there. So SR4, we are talking about, again, that's where the much smaller problem. We are talking about hauling the excavated material in off-peak hours to avoid adding traffic on those bridges that had been discussed, but that's pending environmental review. There may be other effects from noise and light and things that are non-traffic effects. For Byron Highway, we've been thinking a lot about different ways that we can get our stuff away from the background traffic to the benefit of both. One possibility is, instead of going up the Byron Highway and then travel along Byron Highway for a short distance, and we could build a haul road or a conveyor belt or something that would pass north-south over Byron Highway, and our material would never get on Byron Highway at all. That would certainly be a benefit.
Don.
Yeah, that's just the peak, right? Because because we've got rail once the rail line is put in, except for that excavated material, which takes about 6 months. Once that's done and you've got the rail line in, we don't put much traffic on Byron Highway.
Can you go back to that truck histogram and point that out? Not this one.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Go back one more.
Okay. Yeah, so it's these peaks where we're moving stuff from one side of Byron Highway to the other that really can't be moved by rail. If you put a conveyor belt or had a truck overpass so that you could cross over Byron Highway and the rail line, that would allow us to move.
You're on Route 4 right there. Go to Byron.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah,
there you
here
go.
it is.
I thought it was a little bit more.
Be honest.
20,000.
No,
There you go.
You're paying attention. Good.
Yeah, I'm
There
paying
you go.
attention.
Yeah.
So I
So
just,
all that-
the conveyor going over Byron takes care of that blue peak. That no longer hits Byron Highway. And then that green, then you get, show the one now with the rail of how much you're peeling off of that with the rail.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So it's just the underlying traffic that would be on Byron after you peel off, you use the rail there. So if we shave that peak down with the conveyor so that we're not interfering with Byron, and then we transition as much to the rail as we can, there's just some underlying traffic there that still remains on Byron that can't move by rail and isn't coming from the outlet structure, if that makes sense to everybody. It turns out where we're building that outlet structure, there's a bunch of fill material that was left when the canals were built. And we want to use that up for the embankment material. So we want to move that across Byron Highway and get it over there. So that's where a lot of this peak is coming from. And it's a huge peak. There's a lot of material there.
So.
Sorry, Don.
That's okay. So one of the things you could do, as we said, is you could construct some way to connect the south side of Byron Highway, the site south of Byron Highway to the site north of Byron Highway, whether it was a conveyor belt or a overpass for trucks, something like that, that would enable us to avoid Byron Highway completely. The other way is that move along Byron Highway, but do it at night, when the traffic levels are much lower. But again, from a traffic standpoint, that sounds great. There are other issues to be regarding contractors and whether or not there'd be any environmental issues, non-traffic issues. But from a traffic standpoint, that would certainly be very helpful. Possibly you could add additional material through rail delivery, but I don't think it's going to help you much during the initial peak period. So if we look on that's for the eastern alignment, the central alignment, again, we've got a few things that are coming off of State Route 4 that are relatively low, low activity areas. And then the big activities is south of Byron Highway and north of Byron Highway. The sorts of haul routes that we'd be making would be somewhat different. On State Route 4, we would not be going on State Route 4 for these shafts, but we would be building a road crossing State Route 4. Because that road would not be a public road, it would only be used for our construction traffic. We'd put a signal on it. It wouldn't take very much green time. You might run it green, 3 or 4 times an hour or something like that. We'd also have the park and ride lots, similar to what we would do for the eastern alignment, and the results are exactly the same, or essentially the same. The problem is that Byron Highway has a lot of traffic, and it would interfere with our project. Our project would make things, would exacerbate the existing problem.
Yeah, one thing I
with
want to
that,
note.
let me go back to what the potential solutions under consideration are.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to note, Don, while you go back to that slide there is, you know, and particularly people who live down there in the South Delta, one of the things we were surprised by was the existing traffic on Highway 4 only being in that level D. I don't know if that reflects your all's experience. And one of the things that Don isn't able to model, and Karen, this is to your point, is, you know, that crazy S-curve to get onto those bridges. Computer models don't take to that. So that might be causing a lot of the backup, so that the model shows that there's enough capacity, but really that hiccup there in the flow is what's causing a lot of the problems there. I bet you have better experience with this than anyone.
Catherine, may I speak?
Yeah.
Okay, so that S-curve, that's what I was talking about. So in order for a semi-truck or even an RV, and not even just semi-trucks, bobtail trucks too, to get onto the bridge thanks to that S-curve, they actually have to, the traffic coming the opposite way has to actually stop out of courtesy and let the truck get on, because it takes both lanes for the vehicle to actually get through the S-curve and get on the bridge.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened when that truck that flipped over and jackknifed, that's what he went around that S-curve a little too fast.
Yeah, so Don, can you go to the load graph? Because this is where I want to
Okay.
not the
So
histogram, but the load one for State Route 4. So Karen, see this? Yeah, pull this one up right here. This one's good. Not that.
This is State Route 4? No?
Yeah, but I want the other one.
Wait a minute.
The bar chart. Pull the bar chart up for State Route 4.
State Route 4.
Yeah. Okay. So Karen, see how it shows that, you know, you've really got level of service. You've blown it up a little bit too much.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me get it back under control here. Sorry.
Yeah.
My mouse is enjoying itself. Okay.
Okay. And if you can go to the show mode, whatever that is. There we go. Okay. So we were surprised with Highway 4 that the computer model says that, you know, it gets up into level of service D, but, you know, a good part of the day it's an A to C. And in talking to Don, he thinks the model can't reflect the backup that those bridges cause, because the model just sees 2 lanes and it sees a load on it. It doesn't see obstructions in the way. So that's one of the things that we really need some observation on, is if this this traffic volume chart that we've got here really reflects what's going on.
And Carrie, there's one other thought, or one other, I'm sorry, Catherine, there's one other factor. So the Contra Costa County Fire Marshal was very concerned about that, because apparently at the Old River Bridge, that's the last bridge before you get into Discovery Bay,
right,
when you're when you're driving west, there is essentially no emergency services from that bridge east. It's really not covered, so there'd be no firefighters, etc., if there was an issue. So, and again, to Dawn, to talk about your issue, yes, the delay, if there's anything, and it happens probably 2 to 4 times a month, that there is something going on Highway 4, and it takes anywhere up to 8-10 hours to clear the vehicles, and obviously the bigger trucks are not going to be able to turn around. So that's a big concern.
We were concerned about that. We were looking at things like having turnouts in certain points where if a vehicle got in trouble, it could get off the road. But then we looked at this, and as you can see here, we just don't use State Route 4 very much for this project.
Nor does it look like State Road 4 has much of an issue. So this is one where the anecdotal information that we get from the committee seems to conflict with what the computer model tells us, and something either in the model or in what's causing backups isn't captured by this model. So we need to take a deeper dive into this, but we agree, we want to try to avoid those bridges on 4 if we can.
One other factor. Yes, thank you. And one other factor, Dawn. So that road is a levee road, which means that the two-lane road is up about 10, 15 feet higher than the rest of the island. So on one side, you've got water, ponds, and I won't tell you how many cars I've seen end up in there. And then the other side is agriculture. So the turnouts would only be able to be on the south side of the road, not on the north side. The north side, there's no capability, truly, because you've got the water issue. But anyway, thank you.
Absolutely. I have hands up, Glosky, Merlot, Swenson. However, we also have only 3 more slides. I'm hoping everyone will bear with me and allow us to just finish these last few slides. And then
he's moving into I-5, so I think we ought to stay on the south and then go to I-5, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. So do you want to take the questions now?
Yeah, I think we should cover the southern region because the next ones are on I-5 and they're universal to both alignments.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So as I said, Glosky, Merlot, Swenson, and now Jim Cox. David Glosky, go ahead.
Yeah, just to confirm, I do think Highway 4, from my experience, is that it's kind of event-driven. You don't hear about jam-ups with normal flows. It's always, an accident, an issue, an event, and then it's a nightmare. And I'm sure the bridges go along with that. And I do think the conveyor makes lots of sense down in the South Bay. I'm kind of wondering, I know you went back to saying rail. I'm just kind of curious why rail wouldn't work. I mean, you could still use a short rail. I mean, conveyor is kind of like rail.
Well, in order to get rail in, rail, because it can't take a very steep grade, to get over the road and over the other rail line, I'm not sure how far north you'd have to get for the landing and the launch of the rail. So for rail to cross rail is hard. Well, either that or we'd have an at-grade crossing and then we'd be holding up traffic that way.
We could do a roller coaster.
There you go. A loop to loop.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
But you're about your other comment regarding incident-driven traffic problems. That's why when we spoke earlier about the need to have adequate shoulders and 12-foot lanes, so that in the event that there was a breakdown, a truck could pull over to the side and it wouldn't be too disruptive.
Yeah, and I've had projects where we actually stationed tow trucks in regions just so that we could respond really quickly as part of the traffic remediation work. So we're going to spend some time thinking about State Route 4, what we do there. And then I agree, David, the conveyor over Byron Highway makes a lot of sense. There's absolutely no point putting that big, huge load onto Byron if we don't need to.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right. Philip, Anna, and Jim Cox. Philip, and I'm going to be mindful that it is 5:18 at this point. So, Philip.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So after I make this comment, I actually have to get going, but it has to do with the traffic on Highway 4, the Byron Highway, and also the traffic on I-5 that's going to be going through Stockton, if there is any. Most of the prevailing winds along Highway 4 blow into South Stockton, which is a community that's predominantly populated by people of color. And one thing I'm curious about is if any studies concerning the CO2 emissions and diesel exhaust emissions from the truck traffic has been conducted, especially considering that the vast majority of those emissions are going to be affecting a disenfranchised community that has some of the highest rates of asthma in the state. And that's, I kind of think of this as a civil rights issue, especially considering most of the benefits of this project long-term are going to be going to white communities in other parts of the state. So I'm very, very curious concerning the study of emissions from diesel trucks and what they're going to be doing and how they're going to impact the communities along the Delta. Thank you.
Carrie, I think maybe you can talk about what you're doing on air quality, but just a correction, Philip, is that the State Water Project serves 26 million Californians, of which there's a huge amount of diversity in the community it served. So just a slight correction.
So yeah, I was hoping to jump in on this one because
I was referring to economic benefit.
All right, Carrie, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so I was hoping to jump in on this one because we are going to be doing quite a bit of air quality analysis. So we will be looking at not only emissions, but we'll also be doing air dispersion modeling and looking at a human health risk assessment. So we will be looking at whether the traffic in different areas would cause any of those types of effects, as well as other construction-related activities. Additionally, we'll be looking at environmental justice impacts. So we will be looking at whether any of these construction activities have the potential to disproportionately affect low-income or minority communities. So even if it isn't a significant impact related to air quality, if it is disproportionate, we'll look at it under the environmental justice options.
Thank you.
And I will say that although all I studied was traffic and the air quality is downstream of me, it looks, just looking at this graph, that the rail would, in terms of removing trucks from the road, would certainly have some sort of an effect in terms of reducing the amount of diesel emissions that you get from trucks.
And we do appreciate that.
Okay, Anna, and then Jim Cox.
So a couple of things. One of the things I've been really reflecting on throughout this meeting is this is the magical fairyland of funding. Every other meeting I've sat through for the past 6 weeks has talked about how much they have to cut and how little the people of the state of California are going to get, and how we all have to give in our 10% or our whatever to help out the economic status of our state. And then you guys are like amazing. It's is it unicorn money? I don't know, but I'm really, so my comment is this, and maybe you'll cover this in your next 3 slides, but with the cuts to air quality and environmental and everyone except for, it seems, DWR, what is the truck traffic impact going to be on the Port of Stockton? How many truck trips are planned out of the Port of Stockton for the life of the build out of this project? And exactly what socioeconomic groups are going to be the most impacted, which is in our area where we are not benefits of this project, is mostly going to be our low-income communities. So I'd like to know the impact of the Port of Stockton, and I want to make sure that the voice of those who have lesser than us and are expected to give even more now.
We're definitely in CEQA territory though, right? So I'm going to ask Carrie to kind of dive in on this.
Actually, this is Barbara Keegan. If I could just say something for a moment here. The people who consume the water are going to be the ones that pay for this. So it's not like it's this weird extra source of money, and staff can go into greater detail on it, but it is a case of the end users end up paying for this project.
Okay. I would disagree, since we're the ones that are going to pay the price of the impact of the build forever and ever and ever more without in it.
All right. Well, so we're going to stick to engineering in this engineering meeting, and I'm going to go to Jim Cox.
All right, I'm just going to make mine quick. I just wanted to reiterate what Karen Mann was saying about the bridges on Highway 4. I have a standard size pickup, and when there's a semi going across, you don't even try to, go across it the opposite direction. So when there's a big truck going across those bridges, you are effectively making them one lane, in one direction. And so if you're going to have trucks going through there in both directions, then you've added a lot, and I know your modeling's not showing it, but it's not just a pure number. It's the time it takes for those trucks to get over those bridges and how much they're delaying the traffic around them. And then as far as the Byron Highway thing, I think that the overpass sounds much more reasonable. You don't have to keep you know, unloading things onto a conveyor belt and loading it on the other side because you've just loaded it once in the truck. But I mean, that's kind of, you know, just my approach to it. But so, yeah, so that's all I really wanted to say on this.
Yeah, and Jim, I just, one of the things that we're looking at is figuring out a way that we can maybe eliminate one of the shafts. And that would allow us to, like, for instance, in this remedial action slide that Don has up here, is if we can spread the shafts out just a little bit differently, we might be able to just use Lower Jones and Lower Roberts potentially. And that way we could force all of the traffic to come from east to west and avoid those bridges altogether. Because I really think on Highway 4, our biggest issue is those two bridges on Victoria Island. And I think that's consistent with what folks are saying. So one of the things that we're working on is trying to figure out a way to be smarter about optimizing these shaft locations and trying to figure out a way that we might be able to avoid any impact to those bridges. But we appreciate the comment. So I'm surprised they were built that way in the first place, quite honestly.
Okay, so that's all the comments that we have, all the hands up. Go ahead, Don, why don't you proceed with I-5 discussion?
Okay, I-5. And let me go into slideshow mode. Okay, so the project does add traffic to I-5. We add it to different sections, and for our analysis, we were looking at the portion north of Hood. So that's where the highest volume of our traffic is. That's before any of it would split off either to Hood Franklin or to Lambert or to Twin Cities. So this is a high point. The other location that we looked at is in Stockton, north of SR4, where we would have, whether we're moving materials from Glanville down to other sites, or workers trying to go from the north to the sites in the south, either one. These are, and knowing that this is a place that already has recurrent congestion problems. So most of the traffic that we talked about on the local roads were truck traffic, but on I-5, we have a much higher proportion of our traffic is car traffic. And that is workers coming to these sites in their individual cars and then getting off I-5 and switching to shuttle buses at our park and ride lots. So when they're on I-5, they're in their individual cars. Where there is some discussion internally about whether or not we could locate park and ride lots further out in order to intercept them at an earlier stage. Also, there will be for the Twin Cities Materials Depot that will have a rail siding, and so a lot of the material will arrive by rail and will not be on I-5, and then switches to trucks for the last route. So as I said, we're going to look at two places. One is north of Hood Franklin and the other is inside of Stockton. North of Hood Franklin, it's level of service C without our project. With our project, I mean, this is mainly, again, car traffic, which is why it's workers arriving coming southbound in the morning. It would still be level of service C or level of service D. So the level of service would remain good in both directions for this section. I'm sure all of you are aware that if you go further north on I-5 inside of the city of Sacramento, traffic conditions are considerably worse. I will say that our project traffic will be going in the off-peak direction. So going northbound on I-5 in the morning, it gets quite congested as you approach the US 50, but in the off-peak direction southbound, it's quite a bit better, and so there is the ability to absorb the project traffic. I-5 in Stockton, different situation. It's already level of service E. In some places, it's level of service F. So this is the background traffic. As you can see, it's already a problem. We would add some traffic, but very little compared to the existing traffic. We'd be somewhere between 1% to 4% of the compared to the background traffic. So traffic is bad. Our traffic would be part of it, but it would be a very small component of it. And when you think about what our project traffic is, compared to just the daily variation in traffic at Stockton, in Stockton. So we looked at a 2-week period. So for the 10 workdays northbound in morning, there is a daily variation of 53%, and our project would only be adding 3%. So you would be in relation to the normal daily variation of traffic, we would not be noticeable. It wouldn't be the difference between Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. Same in the evening, there's quite a bit of variation. We'd be adding 3%, but the daily variation is 14%. Southbound, a similar situation, we'd be adding a little bit. The daily variation is already quite high. So I don't think you're going to see it, you would even notice the project traffic. But we are adding traffic, there's no question. But with the use of a rail siding at Twin Cities, we're adding relatively little traffic. So are there any questions about I-5? And that's the end of the slideshow. All the rest is slides that, additional slides for individual sites for those that are interested. There's lots and lots of these histograms.
It digs pretty deep. Are there any other questions before we move on to the next item? Anna, your hand is still up. I think that was from the last, no, you have another question? Okay, go ahead, Anna.
So my question is clearly your data is incorrect because the traffic that runs near Elk Grove is insane. And it's insane whether it is on the northbound or southbound. And so it worries me very much that you say that you will not affect traffic in a negative way when it's clear that your data is wrong, because you have on the ground people who can describe when the freeway goes from 2 to 3 lanes and opens up, and all of a sudden that bottleneck breaks up and everything is better. The other idea that the people of Stockton will not notice the level of increased traffic from the project, I think that's a little disingenuous. I mean, the traffic situation down there is terrible, and to negatively impact it and then say, well, you won't really notice is, you know, what level of bad? Well, I don't live in Stockton, but I know their traffic's really bad, and if you increased it at all, it would be terrible, terrible, terrible. So I really encourage you to try to figure out different modeling, because throughout this meeting, we've all talked about how what your modeling shows does not line up with the people who actually live in the area, which is the purpose of this. So please consider figuring out different modeling that will actually be accurate representation of what traffic is like in those areas, because that Twin Cities connection, it is a bottleneck. You will make it worse. It needs to be addressed before you just move on and say, oh, it'll be fine. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things on that. Let's start with the final thing, Twin Cities. Twin Cities is one of several of different options that we're looking at. And we did say that if it was selected, there would be improvements on Twin Cities. In the case of Stockton, this background information is coming from the data that's regularly collected by Caltrans and by SJCOG. We are saying that traffic conditions are bad in Stockton. Yes, that's certainly the case. We would be adding somewhere between 1% and 4%. So we would not be the cause of the traffic congestion in Stockton. We would be affected by it just like everybody else, and we would be contributing to it just like everybody else. We're not trying to be dismissive of it, but we are saying that in relation to the daily variation, we're adding relatively little traffic. In terms of the traffic at the north in Elk Grove, yes, we're adding some traffic. Yes, there are times when there's queuing and things in Elk Grove. The capacity problem there is usually not within that section, but further north, and you're getting queuing back from congestion, sometimes all the way up to US 50. So the capacity problem is not in Elk Grove. If you widen that part of it, what you would get is, you know, a better queuing space. So I understand that Caltrans is already adding capacity in that. They're There's a project now, I think they're under construction to add express lanes on going north from the Elk Grove area into US 50. It's a problem. We acknowledge that it's a problem. And that's why we are looking at things like using the rail connection for the Twin Cities, possibly siting park and ride lots so that we can get our workers closer to their home, and they would be just that much less traffic on the freeway.
Terrific. All right. Well, we are at 5:35. We have 25 minutes to get through the rest of this agenda. Don, you've answered a lot of questions. I'm sure people will have more questions. So perhaps people can send in as we've discussed, as you go through the packet and you review, I'm sure more questions will come up. Please feel free to send them in or send in comments, and we will add those to the Q&A matrix, as is our way. Okay, so Barbara, we are on 4C.
I'll take it. That's okay. It's just one slide. I just wanted to, you want to click to the next slide there, Jasmine? There's a couple things, you guys give us a lot of feedback in these meetings. We take it all in and it leads us to thinking about some stuff. So I just wanted to point out some things that we're actively working on right now based on your feedback that we want to bring back to you all at hopefully at the next meeting. But you saw a lot of the logistics remedial actions that we've been playing with today. We'd like to take your feedback on that and follow up with confirmed alternatives. We have been looking at that barge landing on the San Joaquin River. We're now thinking that maybe we don't need it, but we're also going to look at moving it over into the San Joaquin River area that we talked about last time. We're looking at that borrow material and how it's moving around the whole delta. We'll be ready for that at the next, and I guess I have an accent, I guess, on the word borrow. I guess you say borrow. But we'll present that next time. We're also studying the Glanville site a little bit more closely. We've done a little bit more work on mechanical drying, and with the hauling of the RTM off-site to the southern forebay as quickly as it's being generated, we think we can shrink that site a little bit. So we might be able to come back to you with that. And we talked about the remediation of sites. We're gonna see what the remediation measures might be to return it to different types of land uses. And Leslie's agreed to help us out on the ag side in terms of, a sounding board on some things that might work really well for that. We're very sensitive to sites that are on currently designated agriculture and making sure that we minimize our footprints, and then also we can return as much of that back to ag as possible and as reasonable. And then we were gonna talk a little bit about air quality today and introduce that topic, but the presentation that Don put together was so detailed that we knew that we wouldn't have time to give it justice. So we will try to talk a little bit about that at the next meeting. On the air quality, the air quality emissions is a CEQA thing. So what we'll spend our time on is the equipment operating hours. You saw the truck traffic today, but the equipment operating hours on these sites, and those two pieces of information are really what feeds the air quality modeling that Carrie's team will do. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are reviewing shaft spacing. Particularly in the southern part of the alignments. And I don't know that we'll be ready to discuss that at the next meeting, but certainly the meeting after that, we'll be able to give you some engineering findings on that. And a lot of that comes out of this logistics work and looking at those curves at the bridges on Victoria Island and not wanting to have to add to that issue on Highway 4. And then the last thing, the geotechnical boring program, that's really important to us. We've got it scheduled to start hopefully this year and into next year. And some of the stuff that we'll get out of that is going to help feed this SEC process. We'll be able to do testing on the RTM characteristics to demonstrate that it's acceptable material for our embankments. There's concern about dewatering at sites, and geotech information will help us with how we dewater sites for construction. A lot of the ground improvements that'll be needed, especially in some of the softer peats, is dependent on that. And also, we've talked a bit about a few sessions ago when we were talking about the intakes and the pile driving and various construction methods to build those. The borings that we get from those intake sites are really critical to determining if we might be able to use other methods and potentially decrease the amount of pile driving that we need, or potentially even eliminating, depending on what the findings are. So the geotech is really important to us, and to answer a lot of the questions that you all have had in some of these meetings that we haven't been able to answer. A lot of it is dependent on getting this information in-house. So I just wanted to give you an update on it. We've also received some additional feedback from various members, and that are going to lead to a couple of other studies that I'll add on to this list for our next SAC meeting. So just, I want to give you a quick update, make sure that you know we're listening, but sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to analyze things and get back to you on changes. So.
All right. I think, Catherine, you were also going to handle 4D with regard to SEC questions and comments on the April presentation.
I think if we could spend 15 minutes or, however long it takes for any questions that people have regarding the southern facilities that we went through in detail at the last meeting. If there's any follow-up questions or comments that anyone has on that presentation that Phil did. We covered the pumping station, the 750-acre forebay on that site, as well as the outlet structure right along the existing aqueduct.
Jim has his hand up, and so does Karen. So Jim, go ahead.
And I hope Phil's on, because he probably needs to answer most of these.
Well, I haven't really got so much of a question as it is that I asked the last time why improvements to Clifton Court were not being included in this. And I see the answer that was in the answer packet, and it wasn't an answer at all. All it did was just say that there was, it described the operations at Clifton Court, which I feel is not a very accurate description either. And I also sent an email in asking very specific questions. Part of my email was put into the questions and answers, not the entire email. And I would again say that the answers here are not satisfactory at all. And once again, I'm supposed to be representing fishermen. Now I could talk to fishermen about screens, and they don't know a good one from a bad one. But I can tell you the one thing that is consistent with everybody I talk to. Everybody knows the damage being done at Clifton Court and how it's been happening this way for years. And when we can't get straight answers out of DWR or this panel, it sounds just like it has since 1995, when the Monterey Agreement with the water contractors committed to building state-of-the-art screens at Clifton Court that were never put in. And this is starting to sound like the same thing all over again. And I just really feel that this whole subject needs to be approached here, that this is the worst part of the Delta. And you could build the best tunnel system in the world with the greatest intakes, but if you're still operating Clifton Court the way you've been for the last 25 years, you're still killing fish, you're still have the hot spot, and you will still have the cross delta current, you will still have all the problems for fish. And so I'm just really feeling this is dodging the most critical part of what should be the most critical part in this project.
Carrie, you want to address that?
So I did look into the Clifton Court forebay project, and generally the response was one that I helped pull together in the comments and responses. So generally where we are is that there are two issues associated with Clifton Court. There are issues associated with the fish screens, but we have to have that permitted through ESA, and that includes restrictions to make those work in a way that is satisfactory under the Endangered Species Act. The other issue is within Clifton Court Forebay is pre-screen loss from predation, and that is the subject of extensive studies right now, trying to identify ways. So we are doing a lot of efforts now to try to manage pre-screen losses, but that is the study of quite a few. That is the subject of quite a few studies that are ongoing right now.
Okay, so
wait a minute, I unmuted.
all right. I had a feeling. Go ahead, Jim.
I would just like to say there wouldn't be a hotspot outside the screens if there wasn't the flow that there is in the Clifton Court. And even if you cut back and only use it half the time, which is basically what you're saying, you still have the same problem. And you're not going to stop a predation problem by moving fish around, which is basically what the studies are doing right now. You could move every predator out of there, and then other predators will move back as long as you have the situation you have there. And it seems to me this is all dodging the biggest bullet here for what should be, like I said, one of the biggest concerns in this project. Part of the law of the act that created this said to restore the fisheries and the habitat of the Delta. Now, I have yet to hear word one about any kind of habitat restoration, fisheries restoration out of this, but yet that was one of the biggest reasons that the water fix was denied, was there was none of that, and we're going right down that same road again.
Okay. I think that's something, it looks like something we need to kind of look into and do a little more work on in order to get a better answer for you.
Yeah, well, Valerie, I just want to be clear. I mean, I appreciate, Jim, what you're saying. And it's just not a part of this particular project at this point. And I can understand your frustration. And maybe, Carrie, you can go offline with Jim and provide a little bit more information. But it's not part of our engineering work right now.
Sure, Jim, I'm happy to talk with you more offline between now and the next meeting.
All right, but those are important issues, and frankly, this is a good place to raise them, Jim, so that we can get clarification on whether it is or is not appropriate for us to be going into that. Again, hopefully we can get more clarity as we move forward. Karen, Mann.
Hi there again. Sorry about that. Okay, this is an area that is near and dear to my heart, obviously. Number one, I voice what Jim Cox just voiced because I too am a fisherman and I've been fishing for a very, very long time. So thank you, Jim, for bringing that up because striped bass are not the culprit. I keep waiting to hear what the benefits are to those of us that actually live in the Delta waterways. I'm not hearing that, but that's not my real question. My real question is, and this is a big deal, I contacted part of my stakeholders, which would be people like in business as well as governmental. And the fire chief of Eastern Contra Costa County, who only has 3 fire stations now covering 128 acres and 228 square miles and over 200,000 people. He voiced his concern about increased traffic or heavy equipment of any construction going on for the Byron track and Highway 4 traffic. He's very concerned, and I have a letter to make sure that each of you receive from him voicing his concerns, and he articulated it very well. So that's number one. Number two, and he said that he has never been contacted by anybody about this project. Number two, the town of Discovery Bay town manager was completely taken by surprise with the information that I gave him regarding the location of the Byron track maintenance shaft and the proximity of the tunnel, which would be within, are you ready for this? 600 feet from single family homes where children, parents, grandparents all live. And we just, I mean, that's a problem. 600 feet? And so this is just not a good plan. And then the worst part is is where this tunnel is planned and where all the trucks are going to be coming and going, our only source for water, our water treatment plant, is right there. It's about 400 feet away. And then, again, not to make it even worse, but our only waste treatment plant is right there on Highway 4. And the tunnel will go under the ingress egress of the waste treatment plant. Again, not a good path for anything. So I just want to make sure that the municipalities are at least aware, and maybe that's our job as stakeholders, to bring this to their attention. But I certainly would have thought that they would have not been caught flat-footed. And which one of you want copies of these letters?
Catherine, we're also wandering into a kind of an outreach area with regard to Karen's comments. Do you want to address that?
Just briefly, we had talked about this with DWR, especially the emergency response teams, and we thought it best to wait till the pandemic died down just a little bit before we contacted them, because we just assumed that they were sort of busy doing preparation themselves. But we've just been authorized to begin to contact them. So that's just a poor timing issue there. And we appreciate the comments on Byron Tract. It's one of the reasons why we're taking a look at optimizing the way that we lay things out there. So yeah, just send all those comments in. We'll take a look at them. But no, it is our job to reach out to folks. We haven't reached out to any of the landowners where we put things on those maps yet. Right now, we're just trying to cite things. This by no means is selected or confirmed. So I don't know, Carrie, if you have anything you want to add on reaching out to landowners on these sightings.
I think that in general, we are trying to do a lot of reaching out through CEQA, but I agree that this is a specific issue to Discovery Bay, and we'll need to talk about how best to handle that. I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Right. But thank you, Karen. Yeah, if you could send those over and perhaps send them to Catherine, Nasli, and myself so that we can record them accordingly, that would be terrific. And as Catherine said, they'll be moving ahead with setting up some of those meetings.
Great, thank you very much.
Mel, Anna, and Cece. Mel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Quick question. I'm in my review of the presentation, looking at the Southern Forebay embankment design. There was the measure on the external slope, and it's broken down into two parts, one being 6 feet of freeboard and the other part is 20.8 feet. That includes 200-year flood level and sea level rise. And my question is how that number was derived, and whether or not I could get the information on how that is being estimated. Particularly of interest is the SB5 issue, the 200-year flood. This comes from the flood control side with the city of Stockton and others. And so it would be very helpful for us to understand where you're getting that number.
Is that a Don or a Phil question?
It's actually Graham. I don't know if he's on, but Phil, if you want to jump in, or else we'll just have Graham follow up directly with you to make sure we've captured the question specifically, and then we can answer your questions on the phone and then also record it in our Q&A log. Hey, Catherine, Graham is on.
Yeah.
Graham is.
I can hear Catherine, but I think it is best, as you suggested, to just have it submitted and we'll get the response back. So if that's all right, I think that is the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of engineering gymnastics for this call right now.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm supposed to send that question in?
You can send it in. We're also noting it, and we'll put it on the matrix, and just like we do the other meetings, and then we'll get that answered for you. And Graham, obviously we'll be pinging you to circle back.
Graham will follow up with you to make sure we've got your question captured in detail.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Yep.
All right, Anna, Cece. Anna, go ahead.
I'd like to thank member Karen Mann for actually answering my question. So on 422, I asked what would the ongoing noise be from the operations on the surrounding communities, and Phil answered noise should be minimal from the facilities to the nearby homes, but I don't think anything could be minimal at 600 feet, 900 feet, 1,000 feet. So I'm kind of disappointed by that answer. I feel like that wasn't very accurate. And then the other thing that I would like to encourage is that Suzanne Womack has been very active, very vocal. She is very knowledgeable about all things in that area where you would like to dig up and take away her property. And I really hope that DWR will take a genuine swipe at actually communicating with her and considering what personal toll this project will have on her and her family. And that's about it. Thank you.
Hey, Karen, can I ask a quick question, Karen?
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, so I think just for clarification, we went back and checked. That shaft site on Byron Track is about 2,500 feet away from Discovery Bay. I don't think it is near the residential, but the buried underground tunnel may go 600 feet from a resident. I'm just curious where you think that we're 600 feet from residents, so that I can check that out.
The underground tunnel.
Oh, yeah, but that's 150 feet underground. You're not going to hear it, feel it, or see it.
You don't think so?
No, I know so. Yeah.
Even
on one at a time, please.
This is really mushy ground.
Not down that low. We talked about that when we were doing the tunneling meeting, but we'll follow up with you. That's a good topic. Did give you a good chance to talk to Andrew about that. But no, you should not feel or hear. You definitely won't hear anything, but you will not feel anything at that depth. That's pretty solid ground down there. It doesn't resemble the upper surface peats at all.
But it would have effect on their domestic wells.
Yes, it will. And our domestic wells are all around there, and that's right around that depth. And that was a concern from the general manager of the town of Discovery Bay. So once you receive his letter, you'll understand his major concern is more about the wells than anything else.
You bet. We'll follow up with that. And again, like I said, we're a little bit shy of data on the groundwater levels and along the tunnel alignment, because we haven't been able to go out there and do a bunch of boreholes along this alignment that would give us more information on that, and doing drawdown tests and things like that. So I think the water company actually might be able to give us a little bit of data that might be helpful to answer the questions that they're asking us. So that'd be great to follow up with them.
Well, and wasn't a tunnel actually part of one of the tours that we already did? And we had, I think, 1 or 2 members who participated in that.
Yeah, but this is a different issue with the groundwater. It's very site specific.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right, Cece.
I had a suggestion. I think given the issues with East Highway 4, I think that at the least you should plan to build a safety center before Discovery Bay, and then to serve that area going east from it, that includes more than tow trucks. I think you're going to need an ambulance, fire truck, perhaps highway patrol access there. I think you're going to need emergency personnel over there. It's not a well-served area, and there are many issues there. And if you're going to increase traffic and have all of this going on there, you're going to need a safety center over there.
We appreciate that. Thank you. And emergency response planning is going to be a future topic for the SEC. And we definitely are focused on that southern region in there for all of the same reasons you've talked about. It's underfunded, it seems right now. The area that it needs to cover is pretty expansive. And then you're right, vehicle traffic on Byron and Highway 4 can make it difficult to respond quickly. So those are all things that we're going to take into consideration when we develop our plan.
Okay, and one other thing I wanted to ask is, are we going to have, is the public going to be able to participate today, ask questions?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
We have public comment, just like it's a public meeting. Before we move on to 4E, and again, if other comments come in, please do email them. Before we move on to item 4E, Barbara, I just wanted to note that it is 6 o'clock. So if the committee is comfortable moving forward, we will move forward. Okay, Barbara?
Yes. At this point, I'd like to introduce Nazli Parvizi. She's going to provide us with information about proposed alignment tours and map book.
Hi, everyone. I will be as quick as possible. So one of the things that we discussed at the last meeting and previous to that was doing tours of the facilities and sort of the proposed facility sightings. So a couple of goals that we wanted for the facility tours was to provide visual and geographic context of the current proposed facility sightings we've been speaking about. We wanted to create a tour that can be utilized safely by the SEC and eventually members of the public, and provide options for the tour to allow for convenience and equity in how the information is accessed. The equity question the equity issue I'm gonna let you know is more that different folks have different expertise and wanna make sure that if we were to do smaller tours or folks were to do tours, the questions that they bring up wouldn't just be answered on the tour, or that different people wouldn't have different experiences. So trying to think about how everyone can have a very similar experience and that how that information can get shared with the public. So next slide. So our proposal, having driven this area, a couple of us a few times, is twofold. The first is that we create a virtual tour using aerial photography with our engineers and provide narrations. So the SEC and members of the public can essentially go on a virtual tour without leaving their homes. Again, I want to be very cognizant, regardless of how the state or your regions are opening up. There are folks who may still not have the sort of ability, privilege, or whatnot of being able to leave their homes because of health or other reasons. It would allow us to use graphics and maps and other visual tools to allow for better understanding of the proposed sites. We can collect questions. Folks can take the virtual tour, write down their questions, and then ask them during an SEC meeting so that all information exchanges are shared and public. And then the DCA will provide map books and audio versions of the virtual tour so that the SEC members can go on self-directed tours at your leisure. So we sent you the map books already, and it's also on our website. It's basically an updated map book. You can start taking a look at it, and I'll show you some of the things in another slide, how it can help you go on a self-directed tour. The other thing that I want to really bring up is all the sites are proposed only, but also really subject to change meeting to meeting. So it's much easier to amend the videos than to redo the tours over and over. So also want to kind of bring up why a virtual tour in some ways makes more sense to us. Next slide. And part of the reason why we bring this up, it's not just because of the restrictions during COVID. Having driven through the corridors in a caravan, some folks individually, there are some real barriers to viewing some of the sites. Some of the sites we don't have permission to enter as they are on privately owned land. Some of the sites you can get to, but the views are obscured physically by things like trees. A really big one in terms of public safety, the ability to pull over safely and or get out of the car is limited because the roadways are too narrow or there's just too much traffic on certain roads. And again, going back to the equity piece, I don't know if this is as big a deal for folks, but I think it bears repeating that in order to do sort of the caravan tour, some of the other things that we had discussed, you would need to own a car and be able to drive. And there's, again, a safety thing of, I'm not sure that even having walkie-talkies and some of the stuff we tested, it would be better to do it with 2 people. And I'm not sure that everybody has the capacity to have somebody drive while somebody's actually listening and asking questions and whatnot. So let me go through this video. Essentially, when we say virtual tour, this is what we mean. There would be a narration over this, similar to what you've heard Phil and others talk about, but that would sort of go into the actual proposed site, show you an infographic, you know, the construction area and the final leave behind area. And you can kind of see that relationship between that. This is a rendering of, and again, you've seen some of these things before. We're sort of consolidating it all together and making it site specific. And then here are some photographs taken of the actual site. And this combined with Google Street, I think can give folks a really good experience of the tour. And then again, you also have the option of taking the map book, taking the narration from the virtual tour, and doing your own tour, driving around. Some people are much more familiar with these areas than others, but you can sort of map it out. For us, I did the Eastern Corridor tour. I sort of going site to site, group of us. It took 6-7 hours, which is why, again, trying to do a group tour does not seem very feasible, especially with the lack of bathrooms and things like that. But that's just one tour. You would have to do a Central Corridor tour, Eastern Corridor, or Northern or Southern. One of the things, I'm going to show you some of the things in the map book. Again, all the SEC members have it. For the folks who are here from the public, again, it's on our website. You can download it. But it'll show you how we organize each of the facilities, the tours with the key maps. We also made a note to say to put a caution or put a word of caution regarding privacy issues if you do want to go visit the sites. We are not here to tell you or take any liability of what you choose or choose not to do, but please read what we say, especially around going on private property or some of the safety issues we bring up about the shoulders being narrow. So next slide. So this is what your map would look like. These are working drawings. As I keep saying, it's all proposed and subject to change. Next. And then this is just an example. So we split it up into the northern sites and the southern complex. And then the southern complex doesn't change. The northern sites, the intakes are, it can be any 2 and 3 or 3 and 5, but those don't change. And then the central alignment obviously are the big differences in the 2 proposed corridors. So it might make it just easier if, in terms of how to split your day and which sites to go see. Next site. And then taking in, for example, this is, we marked out on the map where the intake 5 is. You'll see where it is on 160 and whatnot. You'll see the caution, emergency parking on CA 160 shoulder only. The intakes are by far the hardest areas to stop. There are some places on the shoulders where we could have stopped, but I think folks were fishing or using the spots for something else. So it's really difficult to get anywhere near the intakes without kind of pulling over and finding safe places to walk. So again, please note what we say about the words of caution. And then again, you'll see the area, the yellow area is the proposed construction site. And then you'll see the actual rendering of the proposed facility right now. And then here's some photos we took just to help give some context to the areas. So that is our proposal. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we're going to work on doing the virtual tour and giving you, putting that up as a video, as well as giving you an MP3, essentially something like a podcast that you can turn on. And if you'd like to go do your own version of a tour and do your own drive-by, then you can also listen in on information about the tour from our staff. Okay? Any questions?
Before we take questions, I just would like to add that I think that you know, sometimes issues or concerns provide us with opportunities, right? Like, so we have the COVID issue, we have the accessibility issue, we have all these other issues. I really like the idea of having virtual tours because I think it gives the opportunity for a lot of people who are not familiar with the Delta to have a better understanding of it and really get to understand what are some of the issues that the folks on the SEC have been bringing forward. So I really like this approach, and I look forward to seeing if there's any input from the members of the committee.
Right. Jim Cox has his hand up. Or not? Jim?
Yeah, I do. How about the tours that you were going to do of the fish string manufacturing? Have you done anything into that?
We can do that, Jim. We put that on hold for COVID, but if there's, that's a good point. Let's, Valerie, we'll send out a note. Phil can follow up with them to see if they're open right now, and that seems like a place that everyone could stay pretty far apart if they wanted to get an intro to those screens there. So Valerie, let's follow up, and if there's interest, we could arrange something.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right. And Jim Wallace.
Yeah, just this is really a minor thing. Map 13 is wrong. It says Sacramento River. It should say Snodgrass Slough. Just so you don't confuse people. Thanks.
Fix that. Thank you.
All right. All right. Next topic, Ms. Barbara.
Yes, at this point, I'd like to ask Ms. Martinez if we received any public comments. And please note, speakers will have 3 minutes, and please be aware that we're going to have to mute you after 3 minutes in the interest of time and maintain parity for all speakers. So, Valerie.
All right, and note that we are at 6:11. First speaker we have is Robert Burness.
Okay, I need to put my, can you hear me?
We can hear you, you're great.
Okay, great. I'm Rob Burness. I'm with the Friends of Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and we are, the refuge is ground zero really for this whole project. We have been involved from the very beginning of the effort to build the tunnels, first through the BDCP and then through the twin tunnels and now this. We have gone from a strong commitment to protecting and enhancing the fishery and terrestrial wildlife values to some environmental commitments that were part of the water fix, and now I don't know what kind of commitments are coming out of this process. But what I am seeing is increased concern for the impacts on the waterfowl and wildlife of the refuge, particularly with respect to the haul roads and their impact as they cut through from a north-south direction to bisect the refuge. I believe that Sean Worth has submitted comments that you should all be aware of regarding those impacts, and I want to stress the importance of those comments and urge you to give them serious consideration. I'd like to specifically kind of get to some of the discussion today about the traffic and the impacts. There was not too much discussion about the haul roads themselves. The natural inclination on the part of traffic analysis and traffic engineers is to look at level of service. I think it would be useful, particularly with the haul roads, but also with respect to Hood Franklin Road and Lambert and some of the lesser traveled roads, to not just look at that, but to also look at the distribution of the truck traffic, or all traffic, but particularly the truck traffic, over an 8 to 12 hour day during the peak periods in the histogram, as well as the levels of sustained traffic that are shown in the histograms. I think it would be very instructive to know that kind of information. Also, I would urge some consideration of trying to avoid a community impact versus a wildlife impact in the discussion of alternatives, and start considering whether you are going to, whether there are alternatives to meld some of the river road truck traffic and
Thank you very much.
on the waterfowl.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is, I'm sorry, we got cut off here. Just one moment. It is OSHA Meserve.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is OSHA Meserve, local agencies of the North Delta. Also, I do assist the Friends of Stone Lakes. I guess just process-wise, and this happened last meeting as well, I want to object to having to listen to a meeting for 3 hours and 15 minutes before the public is given a chance for a peep. I understand the point of this meeting is primarily to get feedback from the stakeholder committee, and I think that's more important probably than public comment, but I think that the agenda should probably be adjusted to allow for some kind of public comment earlier on, because that's an awfully huge time commitment to ask for from the public, if and at the same time say that you are actually interested in and welcome public comment. I don't think that's reflected in the way the agenda rolls out. I guess just to comment a little bit about the discussion regarding the fish screen discussion that occurred earlier and the comments that have been made. I don't know what the response should be. I agree it's frustrating because the scope that you've asked stakeholders to participate in doesn't really include this, but I think that it can't really be overlooked that it's been required to improve the South Delta facilities that are proposed for use approximately half the time, probably under this project as well, since the CalFed ROD in 2006. And then again in 2008, 2009 biological opinions, and even the new biological opinions from 2019 require those improvements. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous for DWR or the DCA to say, oh yeah, we're working on it. I mean, this is, like you've heard from your stakeholders, the most deleterious impact happening in the Delta right now is from those pumps, and obviously is a driver for trying to maybe have better pumps somewhere else. But at the same time, you must move, even if you were to move forward with the North Delta intakes, you need to do something about the South Delta part of the system. And I just don't think that should be kicked down the road any longer. It's way too long, and there are feasible things to do. It's just that the water contractors who comprise the DCA, right, haven't really wanted to spend time on it because they want to spend time and money on getting the better quality water from the Sacramento River. But as long as the South Delta intakes are considered for continuing use, they need to be improved, and there are feasible means to do that. So, I'm not quite sure how this group gets to address it, but I just think you need to be honest with the fact that you guys and the contractors have had since 2006 at least to deal with this, and you need to move forward on it, and it's got to be part of this package. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have for public comment for agendized items. I'll note that non-agendized items, we don't have anyone saying that they want to speak. That comes later on the agenda, but I want to just note that if in fact there is someone who wants to speak about something not on the agenda, please do send an email to Claudia Rodriguez. Thanks so much. Okay, Douglas Sia has a comment as an SEC member. Mr. Sia? Douglas? You are muted.
Oh, yes. I just want to wonder, has anybody noticed all the construction activities at the south part of Interstate 5 interchange with Wood and Franklin? Because there's a massive construction going on. And I just wonder what kind of construction activity is going on and whether it makes the job difficult for us in the future.
I don't know what that is. I apologize. Can't get there by my bicycle. Does anyone know what's going on there?
Okay, well, I think,
I believe
okay,
it's
well,
part of the
I think I just bring to your attention. So somebody will find out. That's all.
I don't know. I think, why don't we kind of put
I
that
think
out there?
Anna says she thinks she might know what that construction is. I can see her waving her hand there.
Douglas, it's an area that they are using as a staging area for the work on I-5.
There you go.
It's the
Okay,
staging
thank
area
you.
for materials for the I-5 expansion. It'll probably be there for a few
Thank you.
years. I asked the same question.
That's all.
All right, thank you. Ms. Keegan?
Yes, are we, so now is the time for SCC members to provide information about outreach or questions raised relative to the proposed project and any other items you feel you haven't been able to bring up during this meeting. I'll also ask you to provide us with some feedback regarding some items with the process that you're working, and are there items where we can make adjustments to accommodate your outreach to your communities? Like, for example, if someone were to be having like a small group presentation, would you like some staff to participate? We're more than happy to do that. So please feel free to provide us with some input.
So SCC members, if you want to have a further conversation, please raise your hands. All right. Melissa Tayab.
You can think about it and also get back to us via email if something comes to your mind.
Sure. We have hands up by Melissa, Sean Worth, and David Glosky. Melissa. I think are you muted? We're not hearing you. I've seen your.
Can you hear me now?
There you are, yes.
Okay, yes, on that subject, one of the things that tribes would like is actual, the presentations given to them. We got the materials, and I know that a lot of them wanted those provided for them also. Overall, I just wanted to let you guys know what the tribes, how we've been feeling. You know, obviously we keep bringing up the fact that, you know, where is cultural resources in all of this? And that's been our main concern, besides, of course, our significant sites.
Mm-hmm.
The AB 52 meeting has not happened yet, and we have not heard from DWR. So we, of course, have a lot of concerns. We're waiting once again for our AB 52. Yes, there was a 60-day extension, but we really haven't had any communication with them at this time. But overall, you know, along with Jim and other stakeholders, the question for us is, what about the fish? What about the restoration? What about the birds? All of those things, the pollution, every time, every month, when you guys are proposing the haul roads, levee work, you must know that all of those things are we're very, very concerned about it. Some of those topics I feel I can't bring to this setting here, that's in our AB 52 meeting, but every meeting, all of the maps that you're showing us, there are sites there. So we're just wondering why is that not being accounted for? The price that we have to pay is much higher. I mean, our ancestors is what's left, and when you guys struck that, we're very, very concerned. So every meeting, we keep seeing more maps, more ideas, and I get the feeling that you guys must know where our sites are, and why they keep going straight through them is the part that we're really having a hard time with. That's first and foremost, but also the overall effect to the environment. none of that's been addressed. We keep asking for alternatives, and I know that that's coming up in the next part of the process, but still, once again, those are the big questions for tribes, is how are you going to protect our sites, and how are you going to protect the cultural resources? And so that's the statement that I wanted to make for today.
This is a really important issue, and you've raised it a few different times. Carrie, do you want to address that?
Sure, thank you. So, Melissa, I don't know where the miscommunication has been, but we've reached out to all of the tribes that have gotten back to us. There are some that aren't able or don't have the capacity right now to talk to us, but we are continuing to try to reach out and send updates to those tribes as well. It is really important to us to conduct that tribal communication and consultation, and I know that the details of that are confidential, but I do want to say that we're really trying, and so I'm happy to talk to you offline about how to better do that. But generally, our process has been that we're reaching out to all tribes on a regular basis, sending regular updates, and if any tribes have expressed interest, we're sending really frequent updates. So I understand also the desire to see information about alternatives. It's not that we're not sharing that, we just haven't, it's not done yet. So we're working on that, and we will share it as soon as we can.
Melissa, we can also provide, I know that we've gotten you in the past zip drives or jump drives with all of the materials. We can continue to do that. Have you received those in the past? Would that be helpful for us to continue giving those to you?
Yes.
Okay, so we can, we'll talk offline and make sure, because I think even been providing information, the printed information as well, and we can give you multiple copies if you'd like, because we definitely want to make sure. I think the culture of this committee, the hope is that it's constant communication and a desire to make sure that you have the maps. And I remember the first meeting, Anna came in and was taking pictures of the maps because she just really didn't believe that she was going to have maps to take with her. And so, we want to continue that sort of dynamic where with these map books, if you need additional copies, we'll make them, we'll get them to you, we'll get you digital copies, whatever you need, because there's no reason why you shouldn't have the information that you need.
Yeah, and one last comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Before COVID-19, we were really looking into the screens and really had a lot of concern about them. I know we were planning on doing a tour. My question is do you have any type of statistics from the north about screens and how they've affected the fish? And the other part of that is, do you guys have any science on the vibration of any type of equipment, whatever, going through the Delta? Do you have any type of those statistics also?
That's certainly something that we could get on the general types of equipment that will be out there. That's something I think we can do. I mean, we've got the list of equipment. We've now got the trucks. We know what type of trucks. We know what type of equipment. Yeah, I mean, anything you need, if we can get it with what we have. Of course, we can't guarantee that's the exact piece of equipment a contractor will use, but it's the best we can do for now.
Perfect. All right, Sean Worth.
I've been continuing to do outreach. I've also sent in comments via email to Catherine, I believe last night. The major concern I would categorize as being a factor of the largest impacts that we see environmentally happen to be on lands that have already been set aside to offset damage to the general environment in our region. So we have areas that were set aside to help save species that were imperiled largely due to habitat loss. And we're having these huge impacts on those areas where we're trying to make a stand to protect these species. So it's quite disconcerting to see that level of impact on areas that we should, by all intents and purposes, completely avoid. my suggestion in how to deal with that is we're not going to be able to fully mitigate the impacts, however you want to call it, CEQA or for our process here. And I think we're going to need to return to some of the Bay Delta aspect of trying to come up with things we can do above and beyond for these species and the direct and indirect impacts of this project. Because so many of the impacts are on habitats that were set aside to protect these species in the first place.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Douglas has his hand up.
Yeah. Just want to ask, how many more meetings do we have ahead of us?
Well, you stumped us.
No, I mean, we'd like to have this be an ongoing process. So we funded to keep going every month for the next year. But in terms of a final set of documents, as Carrie pointed out, we have a deliverable due to her in late September. So at least through September, we'll be doing this back and forth on these siting and engineering issues. But there are a lot of other topics beyond the footprint information that we give to the engineering document that we give to DWR that I think would benefit from conversations with this committee. So I think in September we should revisit purpose and structure. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And Sean, your hand is back up. Did I accidentally cut you off? Or did you just
No,
accidentally hit your hand?
I thought I put it down, but I guess I didn't.
All right. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So moving forward, Barbara.
Are we now on item 7?
Yes, ma'am. And just for the record, because I know that Josh is thinking this, we actually bypassed item 5 because we ended up addressing it in the item that Catherine spoke to, talking about the things that we're going to be talking about in the future relevant to the SEC's previous requests.
Okay, this is public comment. As noticed on the agenda and discussed previously, we will now do public comment on the non-agendized items. I will now ask staff if we received any public. Yes.
I don't think we did receive any other comments or any other requests. I'm sorry?
Yep, we have not.
Okay. Then we're moving on to our next meeting. Okay, so at our next meeting, we'll be discussing the items that Catherine previously mentioned. However, we also need to note that the SEC needs to identify their 4 subcommittee members who will present to the DCA board in June. As you remember, you picked 4 members who presented at the last DCA board meeting. I think everyone got like 5 minutes to present some information about what has been happening. Actually, Barbara, do you want to kind of lay out kind of how that went and that sort of thing?
You mean the presentation to the full DCA board? Well, first I'd like to thank all the representatives from the SEC who spoke. And I would say that the DCA board was very complimentary of the input that they received from those folks, and also expressed their interest in continuing to hear from them. So as we all know, we need to choose the next 4 subcommittee members who will present to the DCA board this June.
Do folks want to email me if they're interested? It doesn't have to be 4. It could be a single person. It could be an ad hoc committee. It just seemed like folks were happier doing it in a group. But if you'd like to volunteer for next month, please send me an email and we'll put together groups, you know, wherever would like to do it. That makes sense.
And Nasli, there was an offer by the DCA to actually assist with presentation. And I believe everyone ended up kind of doing their own verbal presentation, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And so there's options to maybe even change it up a little bit and do some things along those lines if there's a desire, correct?
I'm super cognizant you may not need our help or want our help, but it's always there if you need it. And yeah, whether it's presentation materials or whatnot, but the last 4 just spoke for a few minutes and it went really well. So why don't we just leave it as that, as if folks email me, if we'll put together a group, and if a lot of folks email me, which is wonderful, then we'll sort of cluster that for the next month. And then.
You think we might be able to get 4 volunteers right now? Just to.
Let's see.
Anna has her hand up. So Anna Swenson, are you volunteering or did you
I'll
want
volunteer?
Volunteers tribute. Thanks, Anna.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey, David, are you interested?
I would love to do it. If I could sign up for July, that would probably work better for me.
Perfect. We have a July taker.
All right, well, we don't want to put anyone on the spot. So as Nasli said, go ahead and email.
Sean might, I think.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I was going to say, Sean has been really engaged in a lot of these issues around the intakes in the North Delta area. He might be a good candidate for the next meeting as well. I don't know if Sean, what your June looks like.
I raised my hand. I could cover terrestrial species in the North Delta for that meeting.
That would be great.
I didn't see your hand up, Sean. I'm sorry.
It's up.
I think Gil may have left the meeting already, but I know in the past he's had a lot of interest and expertise in transportation and traffic issues. So if he were to be interested, he might be able to provide some good feedback on what we discussed today.
I'll send him an email.
Great.
Is there any feedback on 1 or 2 points that were takeaways from the group meeting with the board? Like, did it really help in a certain issue area or something resonated? I mean, could you expound on that at all?
Barbara, could you do that?
I think one of the takeaways that I had was because it was sort of the first presentation, everyone was kind of feeling their way. And also the speakers were trying to put their comments in context, like, well, this is why I'm participating in this, and these are what we've been discussing. So I feel like it was almost an introduction of the SEC process to the DCA board. I mean, there were some specifics, and I don't have my notes with me, so I don't want to misspeak on that. But my sense was that probably subsequent presentations are going to kind of get more into depth, if you will, because that sort of preliminary discussion and setting the stage has already taken place. Nasli, I don't know, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
I was just thinking, David, and then I thought one of the big takeaways was this whole idea of the benefits to the Delta and a focus on that. So that's definitely something that we're formulating now. So we want to talk about that. It doesn't fall on deaf ears that, a lot of the impact is here with the beneficiaries of this project being outside the Delta. So that was really important. And I think that resonated with all 4 of the talks. And then I think there was, there's an issue around the fact that this is an SEC committee of 20 members, yet the Delta is a very diverse place. So to me, one of my takeaways was to do even more outreach and trying to help you all more reach out to your constituents and help support you in getting more of the information out. But also maybe as this COVID issue goes down, it's just getting out there and trying to touch more people and getting more impact in a forum outside of this SEC. Those were 2 of my big takeaways from it.
And from my end, I present every month on what the SEC did, and in an effort to be transparent and to make sure I'm not sort of speaking out of turn. I'm very cognizant that it's from my perspective. We want to give the SEC a voice in what happens at the meetings. And so that makes sense. And my big takeaway actually was that we actually got to think about the process. I thought there was really great feedback on the process of the actual meetings, which is not something that we often have time to reflect on. because it's 6:40 and just to get the information in every month at the SEC is so sort of exhausting that it gave, I thought, me certainly, and I'm hoping everyone who was there, a chance to really think about how to sort of do better, be better, and kind of make the exchanges more impactful.
That's a really good point, Nazli, because afterwards, as I was reflecting, I was thinking about the fact that members of the SEC that spoke were saying how they thought the process could be better. And I think that's something that we need to articulate in our meetings, like what went well today, and where are those things that maybe aren't quite meeting SEC members' needs. And so I think that's an important discussion to continue to have.
It would also be good to hear from the SEC members that attended what their impressions were. I mean, we're late now and we don't have to do this now, but maybe in the future that would be good, because I think I'd like to hear that direction too.
Yeah, that's great. That's
yeah,
great.
I apologize. We're getting a little bit off topic because this item isn't, technically agendized for a full discussion, but perhaps we could add it to the June or a July meeting for a more in-depth discussion.
And Douglas Shea does have his hand up. Douglas? Douglas, you are muted, my friend. There you are. Nope.
Okay. Did I understand correctly that the presentation to the DCA board meeting is a once a month thing?
Or monthly?
It is going to be once a month?
The DCA meets the third Thursday of every month, the DCA board, at 2 p.m. And so the thought is that essentially in the same way that I give a report out on the happenings of the last month, it's what all of us do. Month to month, we give a report out on DCA activities, that the SEC would do the same on their own behalf. Yep.
So I'm just trying to say, is it like each month we have 4 members of SEC to make a presentation?
Yeah, and honestly, it's up to you all. I think there's great value in it, and the board thought there was great value. Whether it's 4 people or not, we originally envisioned, having a single member do each one. So without adding too much work or exhausting folks, whatever that group looks like, whether it's 1 to 4 people, would certainly be fine for us if it's more helpful to you all to do it as an ad hoc group. The one thing to channel Josh is it's not about talking to all the other SEC members and getting an opinion, because that would actually be a violation of the Brown Act. It's really kind of working as an ad hoc committee to do a board presentation. Josh, did I say that right?
Yep, thank you.
All right, and with that, before Josh tackles us, I'm going to cut the discussion. Please do send emails to Nazli so that we can determine, who's going to be speaking, and you guys can organize yourselves. And again, just a reminder that the goal is, again, to provide the SEC's discussion about, report back about the last meeting to the DCA board in that public setting, so that it's your words, not coming through our filter as DCA DCA staff. So that's what we're looking for. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we're at the end, so it's time for us to adjourn. And I'd like to thank everyone for their patience. This was a very dense meeting, but it was very important items, and I really thank you all for fully participating. We are now adjourned.
Thank you much. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.